Smart. And do we have Reverend Dr. Whaelainga Ta Ole Ale Ausumai? Or just Cameron?
I am Cameron Smart from St Andrews on the Terrace. Our minister, Dr. Faye Taulea Usumai, is ill and she sends her apologies.
Okay, thank you. Carol, I'll invite you to take a seat. We have you for 5 minutes this morning to provide your presentation, so I'll hand over to you to begin.
Thank you. Kia ora tautau, talofa lava. We are from St Andrews on the Terrace, Wellington, the oldest Presbyterian congregation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our first service was held on the beach at Pitaoni just 2 weeks after the treaty was signed in Waitangi and 2 months before it was signed in Wellington. Te Treaty legitimises our presence in this land. We acknowledge the role of the Church in developing and promoting Te Treaty, and this gives it the authority of a sacred covenant. It is surely our responsibility to honour that covenant. Our concern for social justice is long-standing. A biblical foundation for social justice is found in the Hebrew scripture, Micah chapter 6, verse 8. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. We believe this bill represents a breach of faith which undermines legitimacy and social cohesion, the opposite of its aims as stated in the explanatory note, by unilaterally reinterpreting the original document. Principle 2, subclause 2, is the seat of the breach of faith and is the focus of our disagreement. Rights promised by the treaty were not conditional on someone's interpretation of whether they differed from the rights of others. At Waitangi, the missionary Henry Williams spoke of the spirit and tenor of the treaty. Our own theologian in residence, Sir Lloyd Gearing, put it this way: the spirit of the treaty requires of us that we take a more positive and sympathetic interest in our treaty partner. This is not reflected in the principles outlined in the bill. Similarly, its stated aim in paragraph 4 of the explanatory note to, I quote, help reconcile differences between Te Reo Māori and English texts and give effect to the spirit and intent of the treaty is, in our opinion, the exact opposite of what it does. We believe it overwrites the Māori version and rides roughshod over the spirit and intent. In the bill's principle 3, the focus is placed on equality, which is based on treating everyone the same, rather than equity, which allows for different actions tailored to different needs. We acknowledge Māori as tangata whenua have claim to some rights which are not universal, rights which prevailed before the treaty and were guaranteed by its signing. This has not resulted in a system skewed in favour of Māori. We believe that equity of outcome should be at the heart of this discussion, taking account of difference and recognising that one person's satisfactory outcome may not be the same as another's. Equity lies at the heart of justice. The present bill seeks unilaterally to define the principles of the treaty, failing to acknowledge the other party to the treaty and their rights under international law, and does not deliver a just outcome. The relationship between the government and Māori under the treaty is interpreted today as a special partnership between constitutional equals, where we are committed to ensuring the best for each other. This bill is a unilateral proposal from one party, the Crown, Without input or support from the other party, Te Iwi Māori, it is manifestly wrong, both legally and morally, for one party to a treaty to change the terms on their own, as well as violating Article 37 of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We, the congregation of St Andrews on the Terrace, oppose this bill becoming law.
Thank you, Cameron. That's the 5 minutes this morning. So just want to acknowledge you being with us, and please pass on your our best to Reverend as well.
Thank you very much. I will do so.
We'll go now to a submission from Ngati Tamaki to Waipounamu Trust, and joining us is Nikita. Nikita, thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining the committee. We have you for a 10-minute presentation this morning, so I'll hand over to you to begin your submission.
Tēnā koutou, he iria hau no Ngati Tamaki te tauehu, kona ki te dei tuku ingoa. It is my privilege to speak on behalf of Ngati Tamaki te Waipounamu Trust today. Ngati Tamaki te Waipounamu Trust strongly oppose the bill. Before I continue, I reiterate the point in our written submission that by engaging in this process, Ngati Tamaki te Waipounamu Trust in no way seeks to validate the process undertaken by the government in introducing this bill. We do this for our whānau and to make it clear to the government that we will not stand by and watch as breaches of te tiriti and our deed of settlement take place. I take our submission as read. However, there are a few points we wish to address before you today. Firstly, this bill perpetuates a falsity that the principles of te tiriti are not well understood. There is a wealth of knowledge on the principles, including literature released by Te Puni Kōkiri, that provide at least a foundational understanding. The issue is a lack of education amongst the general public. That is not an issue the bill seeks to address. Rather, it purports to do away with well-founded principles that do not align with the agenda of one political party. The bill fails to take into account that the principles themselves are a compromise. They bridge the gap that exists between the Reo Māori text and the English text as an interpretive measure. They are not te tiriti. To change the principles to a degree where they no longer align with the spirit and intent of te tiriti is nothing short of abhorrent. Secondly, as drafted, Principle 2 provides that the Crown will respect and protect the rights Hapu and Iwi Māori had under te tiriti at the time they signed it, and to the extent they are different from the rights of everyone, be limited to what is protected under a treaty settlement. As noted in our written submission, no Ngati Tamaki te Tauehu chiefs were given an opportunity to see te tiriti, let alone sign it. The way we read this, our rights will be fully erased. This alone demonstrates the misguided understanding upon which this bill was drafted and is reason enough for the committee to recommend abandonment of the bill. Finally, and most importantly, Ngati Tamaki te Waipounamu Trust entered into a deed of settlement with the Crown in April 2013. In that deed of settlement, we agreed to forgo full compensation for the loss and prejudice suffered by our people on account of the Crown's egregious actions as a contribution to Aotearoa's development. We did so in good faith to our relationship with the Crown and tangata te tiriti. We also did so on the apology and associated promise of the Crown contained in the deed. I quote, "With this apology, the Crown seeks to atone for its past wrongs, restore its honour which has been damaged by its actions, and begin the process of healing. With this settlement, the Crown looks forward to beginning a renewed and enduring relationship with Ngati Tamaki te Tauehu based on good faith, mutual trust and cooperation, and respect for the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles." In introducing this bill, where did the government demonstrate good faith, mutual trust or cooperation? Where is the respect to te tiriti and its principles in attempting to rewrite them in the terms upon which te tiriti is given effect to? Where is the justification in seeking to unilaterally change the principles of te tiriti without consulting us on the basis of a political arrangement? Where is the honour? We're here to tell you that the answer to all of these questions is nowhere. Throughout the process of this bill, the Prime Minister, among others, have clearly said this bill will not pass a second reading. We ask then, what was the point of this bill other than to cause harm to Māori and te tiriti? As far as we're concerned, the damage was done the second the introduction of this bill was included in a coalition agreement. This government has broken the promise made to us. We request the committee recommend this bill be abandoned now without any further debate. I know I've got more time, but I'd like to just take a little second to address our whānau. Tamatu ki te tauihu, tama ora ki te ao, this too will pass.
Thank you, Nikita. We do have some time remaining. Members have questions we can put to Nikita. Can I just check who else is online?
And we have Kushla, Tracy, Laura.
Okay, thanks. Look, so if members are online, if they can just turn their cameras on and just indicate if they have questions. Thank you. Look, no, Nikita, it looks like there's no questions from the committee. And I'll things I want to discuss, I'll raise at a later point. But I've got 5 minutes left in the session for you if you'd like to elaborate or provide any more context for your submission.
No, we would not like to at this time.
Okay, well, on behalf of the committee, I just want to thank you for being with us this afternoon, this morning still, and just want to acknowledge your submission and being here before the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go now to a submission from Thomas.
Yes.
Thomas, good morning. Thank you for being here before the committee. Thank you for coming online slightly earlier. We've got you for a 5-minute submission this morning, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
There is a large degree of mischief in the proponents of this bill suggesting that Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as generally interpreted, divides citizens of Aotearoa into two groups with differing rights on the basis of ancestry or race. Te Tiriti was not an agreement between the Crown and Maori as a single encompassing entity, but between the Crown and the various iwi and Hauiti severally, albeit in the same terms. The rangatiratanga, the property rights and rights of self-determination so guaranteed, are therefore specific to those iwi and Hauiti, and the obligations of the Crown towards those iwi and Hauiti severally. The kawanatanga extended by Te Tiriti o Waitangi is expressly supplementary to the rangatiratanga it affirms and not a replacement of it. Te Tiriti specifically guarantees the ongoing and inviolable legal status of the collective interests of the various iwi and Hauiti whose representatives were signatories to it. Opponents of this bill have stated that its intention is to disestablish collective interests in favour of purely individual interests, and yet our society functions best when collective interests are acknowledged, protected and enabled. In fact, the acknowledgement, protection and enabling of collective interests is the rationale behind and justification for the state per se and all the institutions and services it provides. However, there is dangerously little legislation to protect these collective interests, and they are vulnerable to ideologies of, for instance, fundamentalist individualism or neoliberal private interest extremism in the value of the Malay must casino. On notable occasions, the privatisation of state assets and mechanisms of our collective interests has been prevented by the provisions of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which safeguard established collective interests, nominally of the Māori, but effectively of all New Zealanders. This is just one of the ways in which Te Tiriti unites and doesn't provide for all New Zealanders. And in the absence of other constitutional protection of our collective interests, it is vital that the settled law concerning the application of Te Tiriti o Waitangi to state responsibilities towards Māori and towards all New Zealanders be preserved from pernicious and confusing efforts to undermine it, such as the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill, the Regulatory Standards Bill, and the fast-track legislation. The attempt embodied in the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill to undermine the effective constitutional provisions of Te Tiriti o Waitangi reveals that the motivations in proposing the bill are not democratic, but an ideological attempt to divest the state of its assets and obligations and to vest these in the private and corporate sector. This is pernicious. In effect, the promoters of this bill have simply played the ultimate race card possible in Aotearoa in an attempt to remove the obstacle to their agenda of privatisation, individualisation and public sector reduction. The bill misrepresents social, historical, and legal reality in an attempt to induce a misperception of division by race, merely to further an ideology that disavows collective interests and is corrosive to the collective mechanisms by which the interests of all New Zealanders may be equally fulfilled. Interesting parallels exist between the rationale of this bill and that of those mechanisms and instruments used to alienate Māori land and resources from their former and enduring owners at various points since 1840. Attempts to redefine utility and disavow collectivity have a long and unfortunate history in prior Māori relations. These issues have for some decades been addressed in settled law as continually refined by the courts, the proper theatre in which to pursue such matters, in the attempt by Parliament to assert supremacy over the courts in the interpretation of the law, or to compromise the court's duty to protect the integrity of the state would be authoritarian and unconscionable. The courts protect citizens and the state itself from illiberal, populist, or authoritarian tendencies that may grip executive government from time to time and provide citizens with a reassurance of continuity and stability that contrasts with and complements the political processes of Parliament. The attempt to disavow collectivity by populist fiat inherent in this bill is clumsy and aggressive, as the bill here proposed cannot change the settled meaning of the articles of the actual activity or writing upon which the legitimacy of government depends. Any resulting law or action or inaction by the Crown or its representatives would merely result in further justified claims for better redress, compensation, and settlement will inevitably be appropriate. The bill would place an immense and unreasonable burden on future governments and generations. It is a shameful yet inept attempt to sow legislative mischief.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for your submission. That's the full 5 minutes this morning. So just on behalf of the committee, I want to acknowledge you being before us this morning and just thank you for taking the time to provide your submission. We're now going to go to a submission from, I've only got W. Renata. Mr. Renata, kia ora. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being before the committee this morning. We've got you for our 5-minute session, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't to do this. Ko wai o te hoe Renata takuinga, hiri tēnei no Ngati whanaunga ki Parehauraki, Ngati Tamainu me Ngati Mahutaki ai kato tainui. I te tuatahi, e hia nā hau ki te mihi ki o ka tupuna, nāna I haina I te tiriti o Waitangi me te whakaaro, kia ora tonu tātou whenua, tātou moana, tātou reo. E mihi ana hau ki te komiti, mo te tukuia hau ki te kaui tēnei whakāturanga waha. Me anō, e mihi hau ki ngā tangata katoa I te whare parimata, e mahi ana ngā iwi Māori, ngā hapū Māori, I te ao Māori, mō rātou mahi. Nā reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Morena. I'm here today to stand in firm opposition to this bill. Not simply as a matter of principle, but because history has shown us that laws which ignore the weight of the past inevitably shape an unequal future. Now, this bill disregards the deep structural inequalities that have long defined the material conditions of Māori, and in doing so, undermine the very foundations of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is our nation's most enduring promise of partnership. I'll cover off a couple of points today, and I'll do my best to deliver them as objectively as possible. So I'll move to my first point. Now, the bill in its current form assumes that equality is achieved by treating everyone the same under the law. However, true justice requires addressing deep-rooted disparities that have left Māori economically dispossessed. Now, economical disposition or economic disposition is not an abstract concept. It's a lived reality that has shaped generations of Māori. Now, the mechanisms of this disposition were deliberate. Land confiscations under the Settlements Act, to the Native Land Court and its discriminatory policies around Māori and retention of collective land, which made it near impossible. So this bill doesn't necessarily acknowledge the disparities or the consequences of those mechanisms, nor does it offer a path to redress them. It wrongfully assumes that Māori and non-Māori start from the same position. I move to my second point. Now, wealth is not simply the result of hard work, it's a product of access of opportunity, and of the ability to build upon what's come before. Now, for non-Māori, land was the foundation upon which that opportunity was built. For Māori, land was systematically taken from them, excluding them from the wealth creation process before it had even begun. So confiscated land, as we know through our documented history, is redistributed to European settlers at little to no cost, but that enabled them to use that land as capital means to access financial capital and build industries and intergenerational wealth. But the bill makes no room for these realities for Māori on the adverse side of things. It erases the very mechanisms in which equity might be restored, as if history can be undone by simply ceasing to acknowledge it. I move to my final point, what I'd like to call Māori and Te Ao Pākehā. Now, when the treaty was signed, it was not merely an agreement between two groups, it was an intersection of two very distinct worlds, one built on individual property rights, codified law and hierarchical government, the other built on collective stewardship and reciprocal responsibility and tikanga-based government. But instead of honouring that duality, the colonial law demanded that one world collapse into the other. And the result of that was a disposition of Māori with their land, our systems, our ways of decision-making and our framework of justice. So the bill doesn't merely ignore these injustices, it seeks to entrench them. It demands that Māori continue to operate in a world that wasn't designed for them, but instead it also simultaneously removes the obligations that Māori have had, that have allowed Māori to assert even a fraction of self-determination within it. So I conclude with this. Now, some argue that the treaty provides Māori with extra rights, but this is really misleading because the treaty doesn't create privilege, it protects Māori from dispossession. The rights that it upholds are those that Māori had prior to 1840, and rights under the treaty apply as a collective. They're not race-based, they apply to iwi and hapu as political entities, not individuals based on blood quantum or ethnicity. And modern treaty settlements don't give Māori extra rights, they compensate for breaches. So my final comment is this: to legislate without a thorough understanding of these agreements is to govern without context and to risk repeating the very injustices the treaty and Te Tiriti were meant to prevent. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Waio te hoi. Thank you for being with us this morning, providing your submission. I know you covered a lot in 5 minutes, so just to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
We will now go to our submission from Rangitane or Tamaki nui-a-Rua Charitable Trust. We have Mavis Mullins with us. Mavis, kia ora, thank you for being with us. We have you for a 10-minute submission this morning, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Kei te mihi nui kia koutou, ko Mavis Mullins a hau, kei te uri a hau no Rangitane o Tamaki nui-a-Rua, Ati hau nui a Paparangi, Ngati rangi nui hoki. My name is Mavis and I'm saddened, although pleased, to be able to present the voices of our mukapuna rangatahi, Hākui Hākoro, whānau hapu iwi, who all strongly oppose this misaligned treaty principles bill. I am the co-chair of Rangitane o Tamaki nui-a-Rua Charitable Trust, a settled iwi. I understand our submission has been read, so I'm really pleased to be able to make some further comments. It's been really fascinating to listen to a good number of the submissions to date from past prime ministers, mayors, rangatahi environmentalists, church leaders, iwi leaders, and now someone like me from the sharing industry, all protesting at either the flawed process, the vanillaized historical accounts, or the fears for the future of our mukapuna. I support those voices who decry this bill. To this committee, I commend you for your mahi and trust your decision-making will be tika and pono. Te Tiriti of Waitangi was a covenant between two peoples, British Crown and Māori chiefs, who, for mutual benefit, wanted to ensure that existing rights were protected for mana whenua, but that the ongoing relationship of our peoples would be one of partnership, participation and protection. A generous offering, actually, from our Māori leadership of the time. In 2017, when Rangitane o Wairarapa, Rangitane Tamaki nui-a-Rua settled our treaty settlement, an apology was given on behalf of the Crown by then Minister Christopher Finlayson, And I want to share, and I've heard it, some of this shared earlier, some of the passages from that Crown apology, because I'm not sure whether they have been read or understood. First one, the Crown is deeply sorry for its many breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles, and for the effect that these breaches have caused to generations of Rangitane. The Crown deeply regrets that Rangitane did not experience the prosperity the Crown led them to expect when it pressured them to sell large areas of land before 1865. The Crown sincerely apologises that it failed in its treaty duty to protect Rangitane from being left virtually landless, and they have for too long experienced socio-economic deprivation and disadvantage. I could read more, but I think you get the gist. But finally it says, the Crown looks forward to developing a new relationship with Rangitane that has mutual trust and respect for Te Tiriti, the treaty, and its principles as its foundation. You know, we wanted so much to believe you. We wanted so much to believe this. We were excited about a future where as settled partners, we could work as real partners. We have this apology hanging in many of our facilities. We now wonder, what do we do with that? Because this bill brings into question all those words, those promises, the apologies, the commitments, the aspirations for the future. It makes me ask, where's the mana of the Crown? Where's the mana? Where is it? Because in November 2019, His Royal Highness Prince Charles, now King Charles, when visiting Aotearoa, stated in reference to the tiriti, for my part, I can only emphasise the strength of the commitment successive sovereigns have had to the defining promise of this covenant. In standing before you today, I humbly reaffirm my commitment and that of my children and my grandchildren to this bond. And previous to that, 1963, when Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth visited Waitangi, she emphasised the Crown's responsibility to stand by the treaty and that the Crown's duty was to ensure the trust of Māori was never to be betrayed. So that Crown has been consistent in their referencing and affirmation of Te Tiriti, the treaty. So again, you know, you ask, where is the mana of the Crown in this house here today? And then that begs the other question, which I heard asked earlier, why are we wasting time, resources and energy with this misaligned bill when there's so many other pressing issues to deal with? Why? So Aotearoa, New Zealand, in its short colonised time frame, has been to both ends of the spectrum of decency. We've been unkind and deceitful, sometimes in our motives to each other. And yet we've died on battlefields together throughout the world. We've called each other brother, we've hakaed together. We've been able to call each other out when our behaviours are not quite where they should be. And when challenging issues have arisen, we've worked through not just the Westminster law system, but also our LORE of tikanga. And by and large, New Zealand, Aotearoa has many examples where we've been able to land on compromise and consensus for real collective benefit. We've actually become a global beacon to others where colonisation continues to have such destructive effect. We're far from perfect, but we're on a great journey of nation building. It's been exciting, and it's us punching above our weight as we do. So, you know, this, you ask yourself why. But let me come back to Rangitane, Tamaki nui-a-Rua. According to the 2023 census data, we remain deeply concerned. We are still deemed of high deprivation in terms of health, with an index of 5.5, that was in 91. In 2023, we've risen to 7.2. Deprivation levels are rising for our people. We are still low in terms of our earning capability, with the average wage in Tararua at $35,000 per annum. $35 per annum. Our life expectancy is still not the same as tangata tiriti. And 53% of our whānau leave school education with level 3 or lower as their highest qualification. So I ask you, is this what Māori privilege looks like? If you answer yes, then perhaps we're reading things wrong, but this is not what privilege looks like. There was one bright spot from that census data for me, and that's what's driven our objection, strong objection to this bill. Demographics tell us that 56% of our Māori population in Tararua are under the age of 30. This is very different to the demographics of whānau tiriti. There is a bulge coming, and it is unapologetically Māori. It is young, it is vibrant. These are rangatahi who know their reo, they know their whakapapa. They know the grievances, but they see a future that is inclusive, that's local and global, that's loud and proud. It's a great place, it's a great thing, but this bill will not enable or enhance any of that. This bill will bring new grievance, deeper division, and longer healing times. Of late, and I'm always learning, I've recently learned a new word. That word is obfuscation. In plain language, this means to obscure, to darken, to confuse or befuddle the truth. So why is it that I feel that the genesis of this bill comes from a place of obfuscation, a place that befuddles the truth, confuses the people, and seeks to deceive? So on behalf of the people of Rangitane, of Tamaki nui-a-Rua, and the communities that we proudly serve, we urge you to do the right thing, honour Te Tiriti, honour the treaty, honour our partnership, and send this bill where it belongs, send it to the shredder. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Mavis, thank you for your submission. I'll take some questions if there are any. We've got about a minute remaining in the session. I'm just looking around the screens. We've got a question there from Kushta Tangaire Emmanuel.
Tēnā koe Mavis mō kōrero. Tēnā koe te wahine whai whakapauwera moto iwi. Hey Mavis, you know, you mentioned the sharing industry, and I know you're heavily involved in sport, etc. So what are the risks, you know, how has honouring the treaty given people like you the ability to thrive in certain industries?
I guess as Māori and having the kind of upbringing we've had, Kushla, you know, we're able to thrive in any industry, to be frank. And the other effect, I guess, of what's come before us is that we have a global view of the world, but we have it with a very local lens, a very much a whānau lens that emanates out. And we see this, I see this in the sharing industry, within sports, that we do have that whānau connection that engenders that something extra, which enables, it's an enabler. And I guess that's the fear of this bill, that it's going to take us so far back.
Thanks, Kushla, for the question. Thank you, Mavis, for your submission this afternoon now. So we appreciate you being here on behalf of Rangitane. So thank you for your contribution. We've got now a submission from Nabilah, Husna, Binte, Abdul, Rahman. So I just invite you to the table. We have you here for 5 minutes this afternoon. So I will put the timer on the screen and hand over to you to begin.
Tēnā koutou katoa. No Singapore hau, ko Nabilah tōku ingoa. Thank you to the Chair and the Select Committee for this opportunity to present an oral submission. To begin, I firmly oppose and condemn the Treaty Principles Bill, and I urge the Select Committee to unequivocally reject it. I'm a Malay and Tamil Singaporean. When I arrived in Aotearoa as an international student 5 years ago, I did not know anything about Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I went through an immigration system and a university education system that did not require me to learn anything about a critical part of this nation, the part that allowed settlers like me to be here. Eventually, I got to know and became involved in a group called Asians Supporting Tino Rangatiratanga. I met people who know the necessity of us remembering and confronting our past with humility and accountability to understand the injustices of our present situation before we can actually move on to any form of equitable or balanced future. But the neglect of Te Tiriti education in dominant institutions here means that the Crown has not chosen to remember, is chosen to forget instead. And it is a symptom of the collective amnesia of this settler state. I recognize this type of forgetting in my own homeland from my own life in Singapore. So for now, I draw your attention very briefly to the parallels between what I think is the greater agenda of the Treaty Principles Bill with the political situation in Singapore, in hopes that we can learn from the international context that this bill sits within. Back home, the state regards critical history as a threat to national myths and the authoritarian power of the ruling party. In 1972, the teaching of history was even briefly abolished in schools for some years. Colonizers are idolized, turned into statues. Settlers are seen as pioneers, while indigenous Malays are impoverished, disproportionately incarcerated, routinely murdered by the state, and marginalized in history to justify the ongoing dominance of the settler population. And this continues today, even under what is commonly considered a so-called post-colonial independent Singapore Republic. And in place of critical history are lies of multicultural equality, of racial harmony. We even have a designated Racial Harmony Day, despite the life-changing, death-making structural racism wielded against indigenous Malays and South Asian ethnic minorities. Malay indigeneity is erased, and we are seen as just another group of migrants, as though our sovereignty over our ancestral lands were not stolen, as though entire indigenous communities were not displaced. And the Treaty Principles Bill works to entrench and continue similar forms of violence. It comes from the same playbook that settler societies use to legitimize their sole right to exploit the whenua and to rule over people. It relies on lies to romanticize colonialism as a benevolent historical phenomenon rather than multiple genocidal processes. It rewrites the ongoing and relentless attacks on Maori and their whenua through victim-blaming stories. And it wants to shuttle us towards a future where Aotearoa is just another white Western nation where the indigenous status of Maori is eradicated and they are unable to enact Tino Rangatiratanga on their own lands. The Treaty Principles Bill functions to divide, but it pretends to unite. It pretends to be about multiculturalism and about racial harmony, but it does nothing but harm Maori further. I spent the last 3 years working on a PhD on Asian Maori solidarity. And I learned that as much as misinformation about Te Tiriti ruptures the relationships between Tawiwi and Maori, the authentic learning of it allows stronger, healthier communities to be formed. More and more Tawiwi of color know this. If we don't come from places where colonial powers have dealt similar cards, then we can see it on our screens in Palestine, in Tamaki, and the way imperial powers are laying bare the violence of their intentions. More of us know that Hapu and Iwi nations are nations who signed Te Tiriti and never ceded their Tino Rangatiratanga. We know that equality cannot exist when power is still unevenly shared. To the Select Committee, I recommend that this bill and similar bills be abandoned. We must right the wrongs of colonial violence to build a truly equitable society. And to do this, we must move towards constitutional transformation as envisioned in Matike Mai, to uphold the egalitarian partnership envisaged in the legitimate text of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nabilah. Thank you for your submission and for being with the committee in person today. We appreciate you being here. Next submission is from David Hawke. David Hawke is joining us online and you're in the room now, David. So I will put 5 minutes on the clock for you and hand over to you to make your submission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora, I'm David Hawke and I live in Ōtātahi, Christchurch. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. I can summarise the first 3 pages of my submission in a single sentence. My generation was sold a pup, and extricating oneself from that web of deceit takes a lot of work. Nevertheless, I want to say to the committee that this is work both worthwhile and rewarding. And if you haven't already figured this out, then I commend it to you. Now, it is absolutely clear that both the Crown and the Rangatira signing Te Tiriti in 1840 saw it as a covenant freely entered into, providing benefits to both. The treaty was not a treaty of capitulation, handing everything over to the Crown. Looking at the list of presenters, you've already had quite a list of folk better able at explaining this than me. But if I may, here's a twist. If I think about this question from the viewpoint of a Pākehā born in and living in the South Island, I look around me even today and I see the remains of Ngaitahu gardens whose soil chemistry speaks to their former productivity. And I see streams and estuaries with abundant fish and shellfish. And some of my friends have taonga of ponamu around their necks that speak of an ability to enjoy a creative, spiritually anchored life. Rangatira from the various hapu of Ngaitahu signed Te Tiriti. Why would these rangatira hand everything over? So, as I explain in my submission, instead of a treaty of capitulation, we have a treaty of covenant. As I explain in my submission, a covenant is a binding agreement that links the parties together for their mutual benefit. Thinking of Te Tiriti as a covenant akin to a marriage, this bill is a huge error of judgment. In a marriage, one party does not unilaterally go off on some wild scheme without talking to their spouse first. But this is exactly what this bill has done. Let's just pick one of the bill's provisions, the holding of a referendum. Referenda certainly have their place in a democracy, but not to address complex questions rich in nuance and whose outcomes impinge on topics for which the government already has particular obligations. In this case, the covenant relationship that it, the Crown, freely signed up to in 1840. I mentioned personal values in my submission. Even though I myself often come up short, integrity is something I value enormously. So I find the Crown's actions or the government's actions in allowing this bill as a government bill to be the opposite of what people with any sense of integrity might do. So where might we go from here? Firstly, as a select committee, you must do the right thing and recommend to the House that the bill be done away with in its entirety. There are no conceivable improvements that would transform this bill into good law. Then you might formally or informally recommend some ways that a pathway to reconciliation might be identified. So how can we get more of our people, and here I'm talking mostly Pākehā like me, on board? To my mind, stories, and lots of them, will be a big help. Using these stories to encourage a longer and more expansive view of the past, both local places where we live and the people who came before us, is really important. And there are many groups already active in that space. But perhaps most importantly for us all to regard each other with a level of humility as people. I think that will do for now. Thanks for listening. Kia ora.
Thanks, David. Thanks for your submission. We've probably got time for a question. We'll go one of your local MPs, Tracy McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and kia ora, David. May I just start my question by saying that I've never known you to come up short on the integrity front. So thank you for your submission. I just wondered, can you tell us a little bit more about local opportunities for people who perhaps, don't know enough, haven't been afforded the opportunity to know enough, and how they could get involved to make their understanding better so this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of answers to that. So one is that in Te Waipounamu, the South Island, we have Kahuru Manu. So Kahuru Manu is the Ngaitahu Atlas, and it covers the bottom 3/4 of the South Island. And there are about 500 place names in there. And it gives people who wish to go and look a history of where that place name came from and some of the background in there. I guess another angle is that there are lots of local organisations, such as heritage organisations and residents associations. They are on their own Te Tiriti journey, and joining up with them is actually a really good way to enable a sort of more deeper learning path.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Tracy, for the question. Look, we appreciate you zooming in today and providing your submission all the way down from Te Waipounamu in the south. So just want to acknowledge another South Islander there, and once again, just appreciate your submission.
Thank you.
Right, apologise for the gratuitous South Island shout out to you guys, but I think I'm obliged to at the moment. Look, we've got our next submitter lined up, Tui Marino. Tui, if you are able to accept the invitation as a panelist, we can bring you into the room. Otherwise, if we have some difficulties there, we might have John present. So we'll just check, make sure we can get Tui on. Look.
Right.
So Tui, you should be receiving an invitation to be a panelist. There we go. Dropped out.
Hi, kei konei aha.
All right.
Tēnā koe.
Tākoe Tui. Hey, thank you for joining us. We've got you on behalf of Te Aitanga Hauiti Iwi Incorporated. So I will hand over to you for the next 10 minutes for your submission.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Pari ko ana tēnei kitinga ake, i te mea ka whakatika nā hara ko uhi o mai i te krauna ki runga i amata. Tā reira, tēnei te mihi ake ko maua ko my cousin Pisbus, the chairman of Hauiti Marae. We're both descendants of Rangiui who signed the treaty here in Nui-a-Rua on the 16th of May, 1840. Namihi kia koutou katoa. I also appear as I'm the chairman and a founder of Te Aitanga Hauiti Iwi Incorporated, which was primarily set up to resist the assimilation processes that the Crown had been following, particularly since the Ngati Pro Settlement Act in 2012, and that assimilation process that includes all our marae, all our wāhi tapu, all our maunga, all our awa. And in fact, if you look at it from the context that we do, we can see that it's the greatest loss of Māori land in modern history. That's what occurred in 2012. But the Crown and many of our lawyers have looked at it only through the lens of one part of that act, and that is the section 13. But there are other multiple sections within the act which alleviate that kind of those harm that was caused. But the real point in talking about that, I go to Article 3 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, where it says there, and that Māori have the same rights as British citizens. And I refer particularly to the notion of the legal rights to litigate our claims. That's what I think Article 3, myself and others, believe that Article 3 are guarantees to us by the Crown. And my point being there, the manner in which that settlement process was undertaken made the Crown knowingly made every effort to avoid those rights guaranteed under Article 3. And that's how some very absurd decisions were made. And in theory, we lost all our lands under the 2012 article of the Runanga Ngati Pro Act. If we look in the Ngā Tamatoa citizen price of citizenship by Dr. Montisuta, you will see on page 16 there's a map that shows the area of Te Aitanga Hauiti with Ngati Pro. And that whole, on the same page, there's a title, it's called Land Grievances. That book was published in 2008, and yet 3 years later, we were designated through the legal process as if to be a hapu of Ngati Pro. And what that does, as I mentioned earlier, is to transfer all our historical and contemporary rights to belong to another group of iwi on the East Coast here. And that's why I totally support every objector's submissions against the Treaty Principles Bill because of the distorted nature that is imposing on us of all our generations coming forward. And there's some lunatic sort of ideas that we are all of the same equal. But our lands, we've been on our lands since prior to Captain Cook arriving here as Te Aitanga Hauiti, and yet on 2012, just 3 years after this book was published, which designates and acknowledges by Sir Henare Ngata that Te Aitanga Hauiti existed alongside all other iwi who participated or contributed to defend Aotearoa and the democracy during the Second World War, or the First and the Second World War. But so there's that inequality is desperately clear. And that should not go on to our next generations. We need to go together, not necessarily as equality as the ACT Party and the coalition are saying, but in a way that which we come to harmony. There are other issues as well, which to point out is the settlement of the soldiers' claim that was filed by Tautini Glover of Te Aitanga Hauiti was settled without our participation. We did not get any, I suppose, apology. We did not get any restitution or any of that sort of thing. And so our claims have been pushed aside as if nothing had happened. And this is what this Principles Bill is doing, is attempting to overlay all the good work that's already gone by and come up with new inventions. There's also, I would want to add, the kohanga reo claim, which has not been addressed, and it's sitting in limbo. And as a kaumātua with mokopuna, and all our hapu have mokopuna and kohanga reo, we want to encourage the government to relook at the kohanga reo claim and follow it through. Sure, there were errors in this and that. The Crown does it. That the Crown also makes humongous errors. But the kohanga made very few errors, and they were, they have the mana under rangatiratanga to try their best to put together administration and make the dreams of Goi Pewhairangi and Rātou Mā to ensure that the reo Māori, the taonga tuku iho, is enabled to be shared to our mokopuna of the future. So the last one, of course, is the soldier settlement claim. I want to affirm that that is a pinnacle to our hearts and souls as Māori to be recognised. And for those of Te Aitanga Hauiti who took part in that, we want that rectified so that we sit alongside the other soldiers, iwi, that participated from the East Coast. That's all I have for now. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou, he pātau.
Kia ora tui. Thank you for your submission this morning. We've got about a minute left in the session, so I'll open it up to other members if they'd like to ask any further questions. No, look, it doesn't look like there are any questions from the committee. So just on behalf of the committee this afternoon, can we acknowledge your submission? Just thank you for providing it on behalf of Te Aitanga Hauiti iwi. We appreciate you being with us and just want to thank you once again.
Tēnā koutou katoa.
We now move on to our submission from John Swan. John is with us in the room. John, I'll invite you to the top table here. Thank you, John. We have you with us for 5 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is John Swan. I'm a retired barrister and solicitor, having practiced in Wellington for 50 years. I speak in favour and support of the Treaty Principles Bill. My written submission to the bill included reference to my family and its association with this House through my great-grandfather, who served a term as MP for Napier. He was Mayor of Napier for 16 of the 24 years that he served on the council. I also noted that my father, George, founded the legal firm now known as Denton's Kensington Swan and was a confidant and lobbyist to Prime Ministers Holland and Holyoake. Through these connections, he was able to persuade the then government to purchase Old St Paul's and Mulgrave Street for the benefit of Wellington and the nation. This information is confirmed to the committee as just one example of the contribution made by immigrants and their successors who chose New Zealand as their home, built businesses and families in the certain knowledge that they were members of a parliamentary democracy that created equality before the law and equal opportunity to prosper for the benefit of themselves and their communities. I was reminded of equal opportunity when I found the maiden speech of James Meagher, the chair of the Select Committee, delivered to Parliament on the 6th of December 2023. He said, "Perhaps to some I am a walking contradiction. You know, a part Maori boy raised in a state house by a single parent on the benefit, now a proud National Party MP in a deeply rural farming electorate in the middle of the South Island. But there is no contradiction. Members opposite do not own Maori. Members opposite do not own the poor. Members opposite do not own the workers. No party and no ideology has a right to claim ownership over anything or anyone." The treaty signed 184 years ago was a snapshot in time. There were many reasons why the treaty was signed. They included, firstly, the northern tribes were rightly concerned by the bloody passage of Te Rapraha through the Waikato towards their land. Secondly, the decimation of the Maori population through intertribal genocide both before and during the aptly named Musket Wars. Thirdly, the influence of missionaries as to the practice of rape, torture, slavery, and cannibalism that pervaded and can be attributed to the intertribal land laws. Finally, the English wanted to formalise and secure the governance and lawfulness of this Pacific territory, as the French, the Dutch, and the United States were seeking the same goal. The Northern Maori tribes were joined by other tribes, seeking an end to the tragedy that could well have seen Maori becoming extinct. Those gathered at Waitangi were invited to consider a deal. Their property rights were to pass to the Crown, who would protect those rights, as no one but the Crown could purchase their land. To enable that protection, signatories to the signatories to the treaty were to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Crown. This acknowledgement would result in equality of opportunity to all those then resident and to become citizens in the Dominion of New Zealand. The making of a deal does not end subsequent argument as to intent or profit or loss. That has been the case over the years since. There has been fault on both sides and genuine attempts to redress those faults by successive governments. This bill has been introduced to this House by the ACT Party because of a disparate group of Maori that want to rewrite the deal for their particular benefit without just cause. The universal principle of equality before the law is confirmed by this bill to apply to all New Zealand citizens who will respect the past and celebrate the future of the multicultural, multi-ethnic society we have become. This is my submission for this bill to proceed to a second reading by the House of Representatives and then to a referendum of all New Zealanders. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your submission. I don't know if you'll continue quoting me if I let you know that I worked for Simpson Grierson. I don't know if that's going to sit well with the folk at Denton's Kensington Swan. Hey, look, we've got a bit of time remaining in the session. I'll go to Kushla Tangari Immanuel.
Tēnā koe, John. Thank you for your submission today. You referenced a group of Māori who want to rewrite the treaty. Who are you referring to?
The most obvious candidates are Te Pāti Māori.
Anything further, Kushla? That's probably the time, but that's a pretty direct answer to the question. So, look, thank you for the question. Thank you, John, for your time with us this afternoon. We do appreciate you being with us and taking the time to submit to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, we'll go to submission now from Dan Moore. Is Dan online? Dan's going to join us. Mind trouble. Big bosses are there. Cool. Dan, good afternoon. Thank you for joining the committee. We've got you listed down for a 5-minute submission this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Kia ora, tēnei te mihi kia koutou, ko Tama nei, ki te tautoko te kaupapa tēnei rā. I'll call Dan Moore tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone, my name's Dan, I'm an ecologist and I'll be talking in a personal capacity today. And yeah, I just want to take my written submission as read, and this info is further to that. Yeah, I oppose the bill, and I want to mihi to all those who have spoken today, and to all the points that they've raised. My submission today really is not focusing on loss or hurt or grief. I want to focus on why the principles as they stand can be successful, and my experience of that. I work as an ecologist across New Zealand with public and private groups, and especially with iwi Māori and taonga sites. And I just wanted to acknowledge that improving ecology is good for Māori and it's good for non-Māori. So I want to touch on a few points. One of the projects I'm involved with is out on Rangitane ki te Tonga with Ngati Koata. We're improving a wetland out there, but also a lake with water quality issues. So that project, obviously we've employed and had employed Koata whānau for thousands of hours. We've planted over 100,000 trees. The results of that research on the lake are nationally significant, but we've also improved the Māori, and the mātauranga for that tribe has improved. So I feel that when we focus on partnership, when we focus on the principles, good things can happen for everyone. Working with Rangitane here in the Te Tauahu, we've improved their knowledge of cultural sites and landscape scale restoration projects, which is going to benefit the mana whenua, but benefit everyone in this whenua. The Te Hōiri project is a local project here in the Pelorus catchment with Ngati Kuia Rangitane. Again, a landscape scale project that's going to have implications for understanding the catchment's resilience to climate change and storm events, but also improve biodiversity, water quality, forest health, soil health, forestry land. It's going to have economic implications as well as cultural and social. I wanted to acknowledge that through these projects, mātauranga has improved. Māori has improved, but also ecology and knowledge and understanding of our landscape that's going to benefit everyone. So yeah, I want to sort of leave that with the group today that I oppose the bill. But I want to acknowledge that the principles don't necessarily need to be revisited. It's more our commitment and understanding of them that needs to be revisited. When we commit to them, things are successful. When we commit to the principles, good things happen, and they happen in a number of ways, and we have implications for everyone, benefits for everyone. So tēnā te miki a koutou, thanks for your time today and open to any questions.
Kia ora, Dan, thank you. We've got a question from Laura McClure.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dan, for your submission today. My question would just be around, like, obviously you oppose the principles that have been put up, but do you think it would be helpful that the principles were defined, whatever they may be, and set in stone so that we avoid all this kind of confusion and debate?
Yeah, I think the principles have never been that well communicated. And I think, yeah, possibly that's part of the issue, but there's also, the issue of disinformation, misinformation, where that information comes from. So I think I can only speak from my personal experience in this space, in the whenua space, and when we work well, when we work together in partnership, going back to those base principles of the treaty, good things happen. And that's my key message today. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. We've probably got time for a quick question from Ginny Anderson.
Thanks for your submission. That was great. Thank you, Dan. Do you have a view on the fact that the principles being proposed by the ACT Party remove or don't reference the term tino rangatiratanga, which is in Article 2 of the treaty?
Yeah, I do. I would prefer that is acknowledged. I've seen the benefits of tino rangatiratanga in terms of land management and sovereignty over taonga species, taonga resources. So I think it's important to knowledge, and it's not to take away from all New Zealanders, it's to benefit them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Ginny. Look, thanks for your submission this afternoon, Dan, and just thank you for the work you're doing up at the top of the south there. I lost a pair of sunglasses in the Pelorus 20 years ago, so if you come across them, do please send them down.
Sure, we'll get them back to you.
Well, you like
Thank you,
facts then, Jane.
Thanks, folks. Look, no, seriously, thank you for your time this afternoon. It's a new perspective to the submission, so we do appreciate that. We'll go to, so what's going to happen now is we don't have the Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission with us, but we do have Belinda Hemiona from Pai Ora SSPA. Now, Pai Ora, unfortunately, due to a mix-up, were due to appear in Select Subcommittee B today. But we're actually joined us in our room and we're waiting for their slot, so inadvertently missed their slot. So with the indulgence of the committee, we'll amend the agenda to allow Te Pai Ora to provide a submission, if everyone's okay with that. Looks like everyone is. Okay, so we can bring Belinda in the room if she's here. Good. Kia ora, Belinda. Thank you for being with the committee, and look, apologise for the miscommunication this afternoon or this morning, and you are unable to have your slot in Subcommittee B, but you are now for us in Subcommittee A, so I'll just invite you to begin your presentation over the next 10 minutes.
Kia ora, and thank you so much for the flexibility. That error was all on my part. The instructions in the committee have been working really well to process a whole lot of voices this morning, and I did get to hear some of the kōrero from the room A this morning, which was really rich and diverse, really good to hear. So ko Belinda Rawia Hemiona, ko Ngati Apa, ko Ngati Hauiti, ki Wanganui ngā iwi, engari e tipuaki o ki Taitukarau, ko kai whakahaere mātua mō Te Pai Ora SPA. So good afternoon, I'm Belinda Hemiona and I'm the Chief Executive of Te Pai Ora SPA. Thanks so much for the opportunity and the privilege to present an oral submission from our organisation about this bill, and I would reinforce that we oppose this bill. In our submission, Te Pai Ora SPA brings a perspective from the community-based social sector. We represent over 240 community-based social service providers, providing services to children and whānau, tamariki rangatahi. My organisation is co-governed, and we have even members in the board across tangata whenua and Te Tiriti board members. In our experience, this adds a huge richness and valuing in our organisation to the voices and experiences of tangata whenua Māori, and we bring te reo me ona tikanga, as well as valuing of strategic partnerships with iwi, hapu, kaupapa Māori organisations. In my opening, I would like to acknowledge that many of our member organisations have provided individual submissions, and these have universally been in opposition to this bill. These organisations took the time to submit to this process because they are so worried that this bill might progress and that we all believe this would impact on our communities and services and children negatively. There is support for the treaty as we currently conceive it and live and breathe it, even as it is messy at times, and we definitely note that there is further room to grow and expand together in a true partnership. It was due to the strong opposition and discomfort from our sector that we now come here to make this submission. Te Pai Ora SPA represent about 3/4 of the community-based care sector, and those in care are predominantly Māori, very sadly. And it has long been argued that the process and impacts of colonisation across many generations have eroded the use and understanding and valuing of our tikanga, reo, and broken our connection with whenua, dislocated whānau. This intergenerational hurt plays out socially, and Aotearoa experiences today horrific overrepresentation of Māori in many negative aspects of life, including contact with our care system. What I wanted to stress to you today is that the community-based care sector sees enormous value in the treaty as an opportunity to test and do things differently across Māori and Pākehā, the Crown and iwi hapu Māori. Our commitment to the treaty as it has been interpreted and shaped over the last almost 2 centuries adds enormous richness to the mahi that we do in communities every day. Our commitment to the treaty strengthens our ability to work alongside Māori, iwi, hapu and in communities. And as we seek to strengthen the care system, the treaty and concepts like kawanatanga and tino rangatira, tiratanga give us new models to try and resolve these complex social problems and social ills that Māori experience today. In the here and now, the proposal to shift the treaty in this bill will have real-world consequences for service delivery in this country to Māori. We are a government-funded sector, and any withdrawal of support for te tiriti will naturally flow into what government funds from us, how it works with Māori in the community setting, and how it measures what success looks like. All of this would make our job harder in a community setting. How does a commitment to the treaty as it stands now make a difference to services in our communities? And at its best, currently we have support for devolution of services to iwi, hapu and kaupapa Māori communities and organisations. It supports co-design of services so that they can fit the needs and aspirations of Māori. It encourages co-governance models to put Māori, the main receivers of care services, in the frame for the services that are run and they receive. And it shines a light on Māori success and how we perceive health and wellbeing. We have learned through our decades of experience in the social sector that creating a way of operating that works for Māori does not mean others are worse off. It means that everybody actually does better, and we work together and build that belonging and those aspirations for all our whānau and in communities. We want to be clear that we're not shying away from a balanced and partnership-led discussion about te tiriti and what the treaty can mean as our founding constitutional document. This could really further enhance the partnership model that is core to the treaty. But we cannot support this bill either in its process or in its current substance. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Belinda. Thank you for your submission and for leaving some time. We've got a question from Ginny Anderson.
Oh, kia ora, Belinda, and thank you very much for all of the amazing work that you do in the community for people. Look, I'm interested on your view. While we know this bill isn't proceeding, have you seen any negative or any damaging repercussions from this process in terms of impacts upon some of the communities that you work to assist?
Yes, we are already seeing impacts in terms, it's a virtual signal, even having this conversation. And we are seeing some of the restructures in government departments, lessening those partnership roles. The Māori policy and service groups are often being impacted in restructures across the social sector. You're seeing less investment in relationships with Māori, and you're seeing less of an emphasis on services and connecting more richly with Māori service design models and programs.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I could have one more, if that's possible.
Yes, Ginny Anderson.
Thank you. Belinda, we've heard lots on this committee that Māori get unfair benefits, that they're given privileged rights, and the treaty principles and the treaty are seen as a way of doing this. Could you just respond to that in light of some of your experience and the role you carry out in the community?
It's quite a challenging frame, isn't it? Because I think what we deal with is amazing resilience and wealth within Māori communities and such love for whānau and doing as much as you can to keep your whānau and children safe and thriving. But the overall impression in the social sector is one of vulnerability and one where the system does not work naturally for Māori communities, does not value a relationship with iwi or devolution in the true sense of the word and sharing that the power and the way we do things in true partnership. So I think I'd really love to know what those privileges look like in reality, and that is definitely not to say that Māori exist in a deficit paradigm, which I'm really careful to frame in that way as well. But I'm just really curious to know what those privileges might look like, because it's a real struggle, especially at the moment out there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Belinda. Thanks, Jenny. If there's no further questions, what we'll do is we'll just wrap up the session. Just on behalf of the committee, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, both in person and then online eventually. Thank you for your submission on behalf of Te Pai Ora. And as Jenny said, thanks for the work you do out there in the community as well.
Thanks for your time.
We now have our submission from Emily Beausoleil. Correct. Emily, come to the table. Thank you for being with us, Emily. Thanks for being here for a while this afternoon. We've got your submission for 5 minutes today, so I'll hand over to you to begin.
Okay, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki te Atiawa, ki Taranaki whānui, ki Ngati toa, hoki, ngā mana whenua o te rohe nei. My name is Emily Beausoleil. I'm an associate professor of politics at Te Herenga Waka, just up the hill, Victoria University. And you've heard many deeply informed and brilliant submissions already, explaining all the many reasons why we should absolutely oppose this bill. So today, what I like to do is highlight, as a democratic and multicultural scholar, 3 things that are whose misunderstanding or whose willful misrepresentation undergird this bill and other pieces of legislation that we've seen from this government. So the first is that democracy should never be confused or conflated with its most blunt of instruments, namely majority rule mechanisms like voting and referenda. Functioning democracies are always far more than this, with majority rule held in check and balance by rule of law and codified rights, independent institutions, and various procedures that ensure that our decisions are informed, but also cannot be used to suppress fundamental rights or minorities. Without such checks, majority rule can silence nearly half of a community and can weaponize the numbers game of demographics for anti-democratic ends. For instance, forcing local councils to hold uninformed referenda in order to remove even one assured seat of mana whenua, a voice at council tables, or a government with 53% majority pushing through policies and legislation that go against public consultation, expertise, or their own impact analyses that say they should not proceed because of the harms to communities. Every time I see majoritarianism weaponized in this way, I'm reminded of how in 1840, British subjects were a super minority of 1 to 2% of the population. And yet rangatira extended to them the right to call this place home, but also self-govern alongside them, the most generous of minority rights that's been met with voracious taking and taking over. One treaty partner cannot impose its laws, culture, language, and practices on others and call that inclusion. It cannot dictate the terms by which treaty partners engage or actively suppress Indigenous voices and rights and call that equality. To hold democratic values is to fiercely protect the ability of all citizens, not just the majority, to have a meaningful voice in shaping our community. Human rights, including Indigenous rights, cannot be at the mercy of majority rule. Second, it is a fundamental inaccuracy to construe Māori rights, voice, and place in this country as a question of race or culture. Treaties are not signed by cultures. They are not signed by races. They are signed by sovereign nations. It's how we should be treating this important document. We would never deign to rewrite the terms of our treaties with 1,900 plus treaty partners without their involvement. But this is even more vital here because this treaty alone sets terms for how these polities live together in the same land. Finally, the treaty is the context for our democracy, not the other way around. The right of this government to exist and function was granted in Te Tiritio Waitangi, which explicitly provides the terms by which that right is granted. To undermine the treaty, to distort or deny what was agreed to in that compact, therefore directly erodes the right of this House to govern. It bears repeating here. The legitimacy of this House depends on the extent to which it upholds Te Tiritio Waitangi, the extent to which it honors and upholds Tino Rangatiratanga, the ongoing political authority of iwi and hapu. It also makes it an utter absurdity and violation in itself to allow a tiny minority party within Ka-Wanatanga to unilaterally rewrite the terms by which it is given its right to stand. Every time this House uses legislation or the weight of numbers to suppress the rights, voices, and place of those who gave them their right to govern, the more it corrodes its own foundations. Despite all that's happened, Te Tiriti provides a clear path to restoring balance and moving forward together in this country. To quote Moana Jackson, if enough people can be brave, if enough people can unlearn racism and injustice, then we can actually build good relationships in this country. We can reclaim what Te Tiriti promised. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Emily. Thank you for your submission. That's probably right on the 5 minutes we have this afternoon. So just want to acknowledge your presence on behalf of the committee. Thank you. We'll go to submission from Hayward Norman. Hayward's joining us online. Hayward, good afternoon. Thank you for joining the committee. We've got you for a 5-minute submission this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to start your presentation. Hayward, you're on mute currently.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Te mea tuatahi māku ko te wehe o te atua. My name is Hayward Norman, as you said, thank you. I bought a really great book. I hope you can see it. It's printed by the government printer in 1877 and reprinted in 1976. And the beauty about this book, it's got every fold out of every treaty that was sent around the country and signed. It's also got Hobson's letters to Governor George Grips. And I find that really useful for looking at who he was addressing at the Waitangi and at the Hokianga. Can I read a little bit about it? His orders from Lord Norman B. Hobson's orders on the 14th of August 1839 in England were these. The Maori people whose title to the soil and to the sovereignty of New Zealand is indisputable and has been solemnly recognised by the British government. It's in G. Schofield's 1930 book, Captain William Hobson, page 202 to 203. But I thought this was particularly important in our rangatahi and all the citizens of New Zealand learning about what actually happened at the treaty, because Hobson was there. He's talking to the people at Manunu in the Hokianga, and someone jumps up and says, why should we listen to you? Don't sign this treaty. In fact, that person, a rangatira, was interested in following the French government and signing maybe a treaty with them. And so Hobson says to him, where is that? Excuse me. I asked him if he was aware that English laws could only be exercised on English soil. Yeah. I asked him if he's aware. He replied, I am not aware, I'm not a lawyer. Upon which I begged him to resume his seat and told the chiefs that he had given them, if he had given him advice in utter ignorance of this most important fact, adding, if you listen to such counsel and oppose me, you will be stripped of all your land by a worthless class of British subjects who will consult no interest but their own and who care not how much they trample on your rights. I am sent here to control such people and to ask from you the authority to do so. He's saying that it was they were outside the jurisdiction of Britain, outside the jurisdiction of the Queen. So I find that really helpful, his view that English law is only on English soil. I'd just like to say that the whole matter of the Treaty of Waitangi came about through 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs who wrote a letter with help from the Secretary of the Church Missionary Society of New Zealand, William Yates. And 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs, it was more a prayer. They said, they mentioned the French are at hand coming to take away our land. And they write, therefore we pray thee to become our friend and the guardian of these islands. It started with friendship. And one of the things that happened is King William IV responded with friendship and sent James Busby as an intermediary, as the first British resident. Busby arrives at Pai Ora after his boat was ashore. It was just off the shore. And as he came ashore, there was a 7-gun salute. And the Māori chiefs, there were over 500 people present, had what was probably one of the greatest occasions in New Zealand up to that date. That one of the great powers of the world was visiting. And Busby read out his letter from Lord Goderich, and saying that he was going to be an intermediary, he was going to be a whakarite. And he wrote this after talking to the chiefs, after they sold him land, and he built the treaty house, up at the treaty house. He said, when I build my house, I look forward to inviting you there as my friends. Again, this whole concept of friendship. Whitiwhai Harawira said, and understanding and looking at all of the what people were saying from that era, the generation that signed the treaty, they were all friends. They were all friends. Henry Williams, the missionary, said that this treaty is an act of love by Queen Victoria, by Her Majesty, to you. And do we have anything to confirm that? Well, we have this book. It's called "And Not to Yield." It's about a group of 13 Māori who went to England with Sir William Jenkins, and they were there to see the wonders of England and to come back and talk to our people here what they saw. Queen Victoria.
Sorry, Hayward, I apologise, but we're now about a minute over time, so I'll just ask you to bring your comments to a close.
Yeah, okay. Well, that was fast. Queen Victoria became the godmother of a baby that was born from a member of the group, and Albert Victor Pomare was born. Visitors to the War Memorial Museum in Auckland may see the silverware, the christening cup. So I just want to say it was all about friendship, and now we've got this. I object to the treaty principles because they're trying to change it. They're trying to include everybody. But it's clear from this book especially that the negotiations of Hobson as Lieutenant Governor were with the rangatira as representatives of Māori people. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayward. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Look, I do apologise. It does go very quickly, that 5 minutes, but
it does.
Appreciate you being with us and providing some of your insight in some of those readings. It is very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you.
We move on to our submission from, is it Chellie? Chellie Spiller? Chellie, hopefully joining us online.
Sure.
Kia ora, Chellie. Sorry, hopefully I've pronounced your name correctly, but thank you for being with the committee this afternoon. We have you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I will hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Tēnā koe e te hea mana, Honourable James Meagher. Tēnā koutou ngā mema o te committee. Ko ngai tahu matawhaiti tōku hapū, ko iwitea te marae, ko ngā tahanunu ki wairo tōku iwi, ko Chellie spiller tōku ingoa. I stand in strong opposition to the principles of Treaty of Waitangi Bill. As a Professor of Leadership, a researcher, and most importantly, a wahine Māori, I am a descendant of people, including my Pākehā forebears, who uphold the foundational promise of partnership, trust, and equitable futures. I take my submission as read and submit further clarification on my points. My first point is that Te Tiriti is a living covenant. Te Tiriti is not an historical relic to be altered for political convenience. It is a living agreement that continues to shape our society. The principles of Te Tiriti have been carefully developed through legal precedent, expert scholarship, and generations of negotiation between Māori and the Crown, drawn from grassroots lived experience. My next point concerns the destabilisation of the Māori-Crown relationship. This bill is not a neutral clarification. It is a deliberate attempt to unravel the careful social fabric that binds us. It threatens the trust, partnership, and equity that underpin our democracy. When constitutional agreements are disregarded, rewritten, and imposed, the very foundation of our governance is weakened. Aligned to this point is the right to peaceful transitions of power. A stable democracy depends on peaceful transitions of power and public trust in governance. The government knowingly agreed to this bill as a political trade-off. While they claim to oppose it, they have placed political aggrandizement over good faith governance, which is an astonishing breach of trust. This sets a dangerous precedent for future governance of this nation. A stable democracy requires trust. Trust in institutions, in leadership, and in the integrity of agreements. And this bill erodes that trust. It fosters division by presenting Te Tiriti as an obstacle rather than a foundation. Any legislation that seeks to weaken this foundation does not serve our future, it fractures it. The principles enshrined in Te Tiriti is not about privilege. It is about ensuring a just and equitable future for all. My next point is about evidence. The Waitangi Tribunal has made it clear this bill lacks evidence. It is not a response to any failing system. It is ideologically driven, ignoring the decades of rigorous research and legal interpretation that have helped uphold Te Tiriti in our modern governance structures. Dismantling this progress is reckless. Evidence from research shows the importance of cultural match in governance. We've heard speakers this morning speak to this point. Decades of Indigenous research confirm that governance thrives when it aligns with cultural values. When governance reflects cultural community structures, it gains legitimacy, fostering trust and participation. When governance is imposed without that cultural legitimacy, communities withdraw their support. Cultural match, and I learned this from my time at Harvard Kennedy School, built on 35 years of research, working with Native American tribes and Indigenous communities around the world. Cultural match is a discerning process, it is not a flow chart. This bill represents cultural match at its most damaging, a top-down imposition that ignores Māori worldviews and established processes of governance. Codification is code for sanitisation. You cannot codify the tikanga that shapes these principles into a simplistic, abstract framework. Tikanga is contextual, relational, and deeply connected to whenua and people. Turning principles into a boilerplate template strips away its context and nuance. Another example of evidence comes from my research as a Ngāpai o Te Maramatanga Research, the Māori Centre for Research Excellence, which shows that Māori economies of well-being thrive when whānau are at the heart of economic transformation. When Māori communities shape their own pathways, we see stronger social cohesion, intergenerational stability, and sustainable economic development that nurtures oranga livelihoods. In our forthcoming book, we showcase case studies of Māori businesses who are igniting incredible transformation, economic transformation in their communities. We align Māori economies of wellbeing with the latest sustainable economic developments internationally. This body of evidence shows how Māori worldviews can shape a society that is better for all. And yet this bill fails to recognise effective, proven pathways for Māori success. It is not about preferential treatment. It is about empowering effective, Māori-led solutions that benefit all. Respectfully to those who believe the bill provides clarity, in reality, for many Māori, it represents an attempt at erasure. This bill claims to promote equality, but is it fair when equality is defined by those in power from a particular political, ideological standpoint? Does a rhetoric regarding equality then become a tool for injustice, I ask you? Te Tiriti established Māori as partners, not subordinates, not consultants, or an interest group or a stakeholder. By destabilising this partnership, the bill seeks to impose a framework where fairness is dictated by those in power rather than by what is just. In closing, we are at a crossroads. Do we honour Te Tiriti, uphold trust and strengthen our democracy, or do we allow political convenience to unravel the foundations of our nation? I urge this committee to reject this bill. Do not let short-term political agreements undermine our nation's integrity. Recognise that true leadership is about honour, not ideology. My recommendations are to withdraw the bill. I also, listening to all the speakers that have come forward, I encourage an embodied listening tour. You've done an amazing job of listening, and I acknowledge that. But I also really take heart when I hear the testimonies from these remarkable, humble people who've come forward. I urge the committee to go on an embodied listening tour, reach out to people, go into their marae, walk their land, sit in their whare, and learn from the grassroots. And as a professor of leadership, it would be remiss of me not to encourage leadership development. Leaders who see the whole picture, who come alongside people and create the conditions for communities to thrive. Leaders who weave people together, identifying points of mutuality, yes, but also honouring difference as a strength. Leaders who look to develop everyone's potential and have an abiding belief that we are in this waka together. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Okay, Chellie, thank you for your submission. We've got a question from Simon Court.
Ngā mihi, Simon.
Simon, you're very faint. Sorry, mate. I'm not sure if your volume is well up.
Oh, how's that? If I speak
Yeah.
up, is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, I'm really interested in your introduction and your written submission, where you state the legislation undermines the foundational principles of Te Tiriti. Does the treaty in either the English or Te Reo version have the term principles or define principles anywhere?
I would say that the way in which Te Tiriti, the Te Reo version, seeks to embody the relationship between Māori and the Crown, where tino rangatiratanga is a key foundational cornerstone of kawanatanga. And as the Waitangi Tribunal has identified, over the years, and it is an evolving understanding that principles such as kāwanatanga, tino rangatiratanga, partnership, options, active protection, equity and redress are part of a living practice in which we seek to apply tikanga and our values in practice as it is contextually relevant to today's times. And in that regard, Simon, I would also call upon my own work on wayfinding leadership, where we're all called to be wayfinders to discern what is most appropriate according to the context of our times and to live this as part of the practice so they are inseparable, te tiriti, and the ways in which we understand it to be lived today.
Thank you. Thank you,
Chellie,
Simon.
I mean,
Thank
I
you,
can
Simon.
only assume that that's a no because I don't think they appear in either version based on what I've read.
Okay, thanks, Simon. That's probably enough for this afternoon. We're about a minute over time now. So, look, just want to acknowledge your submission, Chellie. Thank you for joining the committee and for presenting today.
Ngā mihi nui koutou.
We will go to submission now from Helen Carmody. Helen, thank you for being with us. I'd like to invite you up to the table. Yourself settled in. So thank you, Helen. Thank you for being with the committee. We have you for a 5-minute submission this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin.
Thank you for this opportunity. I strongly oppose the Treaty Principles Bill because it reads to me as an attempt to rewrite the Treaty of Waitangi with no consultation with the treaty partners, and it ignores New Zealand history, 185 years of history. All my ancestors came to this beautiful country from Britain, and they were all here by 1875. I had a wonderful childhood growing up on a farm on confiscated land. I didn't know it was confiscated land. I didn't know it was confiscated from the ancestors of my school classmates. We were taught no New Zealand history. The school bus picked us up at the gate every morning, and as well as the Pākehā students, many of them descended from the first white settlers in the district, the first white settlers of 1865 and 1881. And my classmates included children from families named Ruakere, Homini, Manu, Hawke, Hana, Ngāwhare. That was all just normal. And there we were in the school class photos, smiling together in perpetual sunshine, and we looked as if we all had the same secure economic base of land ownership, but I have learned that we didn't. I had a wonderful Maori teacher when I was 10 years old. Phyllis Komani was dignified and serious. She expected us to work hard. She encouraged us, and we knew she liked us. That dignified, inspiring teacher was a direct descendant of the Maori people the land was confiscated from. I speak here today as an individual, but Pākehā friends and family I've told about my submission have said, "Oh, that's amazing, thank you. You speak for us too." In recent years, I've learned to understand more by reading history online. There are films, and there are lots of great books in bookshops and libraries. Recently, The Invasion of the Waikato is an amazing read. The Forgotten Coast has some astonishing stories. I've seen letters to the paper saying the bill is a good idea. Let's have a referendum. No. This is not a simple matter like should we have seat belts or what time should the pubs close. Do not try to sweep away 185 years of history. This bill talks about equality. Everyone gets the same sized piece of pie. But what about equity? The dictionary tells me that different people may need different resources to achieve equal outcomes. And there's a picture of a line of people all wanting to see over a wall. The tall ones can see over, the not so tall have difficulty or can't see, and there's one in a wheelchair. So what do they need? Ask them. A box to stand on, maybe 2 boxes, a ladder, a ramp. And then they all can see they all have equal opportunity. That's equity. We need to walk together and work together in this beautiful land. This bill is not needed, it's not wanted, it has come from nowhere with no consultation. And I know the politicians are saying it will not pass, but that hasn't happened yet. I strongly oppose this bill, and I ask all members of Parliament to firmly oppose the Treaty Principles Bill and stop it from proceeding any further. Please.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for your submission this afternoon. That's close to the end of the 5 minutes, so unless there's any very quick questions, we'll just on behalf of the committee, thank you for being with us and for
Thank you for this opportunity.
Our next submission is online and from Te Otāne Huata.
Kia ora. So I'm going to go straight to my submission because 5 minutes, there's not a lot of time for a big mouth like me, and I hope you can all keep up. So kia ora tātou, I'll take my submission as read. I obviously oppose this rubbish bill, and I'd like to make it clear that although I'm presenting today, my presentation is the furthest thing from complicity in this ridiculous waste of time process. This is an absolute shit show. The Waitangi Tribunal...
Okay, so we're going to get off on the right foot.
Okay.
Process with a bit of respect and decorum, and take it seriously, please.
Okay, cool. The Waitangi Tribunal have been around for 50 years this year, and their findings have ultimately supported our recollection of Te Tiriti and its history. Hundreds, if not thousands, of lawyers and treaty experts have looked into our history and clearly determined sovereignty was not ceded. Yet, here we are, still held hostage to colonial rule and colonial systems. And despite these experts, we're expected to believe that one guy who has zero understanding of a Māori worldview knows more about why our ancestors signed Te Tiriti than literally anyone else. So kia ora, my name is Te Otāne Huata. I'm Ngati Kaungunu, Ngati Waipounamu, Ngati Whakauē and Ngāpuhi. And as I've seen the Treaty Principles Bill unfold, as well as the Regulatory Standards Bill unfold, as well as every other attack this government has made against Te Tiriti of Waitangi and he whakaputanga, I'm reminded of my ancestor, Hine Tāpora, a great chieftainess of Te Tairāwhiti directly descended from Poraurangi and Pākehā themselves. She was revered as having enormous mana in her time, and when Tamahai, a great whānau Apanui chief, came to her pā, he looked to usurp her mana, because her mana represented all of her ancestors before her, and her people were warned that they were all to be massacred along with her. But before his arrival, Hine Tāpora asked her people to run for the hills while she stayed back to face Tamahai and his forces alone. She sat stoically at her pā, and Tamahai eventually decapitated her. He did not pursue the rest of her people because her mana was so great that he was satisfied. And we remember Hine Tāpora for her sacrifice to this very day, e kia nei te upoko maro o Hine Tāpora. I'm reminded of her story because of this whole fiasco in trying to change the Te Tiriti of Waitangi has no mana to it. And let me remind everyone that Te Tiriti of Waitangi was signed between Māori and the Crown. And I suppose I'm pointing out the obvious here, but the Justice Select Committee, you are not the Crown. The presiding government is not the Crown. And you would think that the ones that who get to change the terms and conditions of the treaty under your own international law would be those parties that entered into it. Yet this Parliament, who was not even established in 1840, is going to try and tell me that they have the authority to change it. Gamo. Te Tiriti of Waitangi was a good faith, well-intentioned agreement between presumably friends. And if we were enemies, we would have made that clear. Pākehā would not be here. Yet the Crown and this government have never honoured their part. The Crown literally wrote the treaty, and get this, they breached it thousands and thousands of times. I'm reminded of this story because even as enemies, Tamahai recognised great mana. But this agreement was supposedly signed between friends who wished for a peaceful coexistence, and frankly, since 1852, when this Parliament was established, I have not seen any mana. Te Tiriti of Waitangi, as supported by Te Paparahi o Te Raki, determined the Crown was given authority to govern the lawless, reckless people in Kororareka, And if it wasn't clear, Article 1, Article 3 repeats kāwanatanga. And I noticed that Mr. Court is here with us today. And if you were to ask us about whether Te Tiriti offers special privileges based on ancestry, I hope you can grasp onto this one. Te Tiriti o Waitangi says British, you can go create your laws and manage your own, while Māori can maintain tino rangatiratanga. Not special rights or privileges, but separate governance systems. Treaty Principle 1 of the Treaty Principles Bill debunked. Treaty Principle 2, tino rangatiratanga means absolute authority. Principle 2, if enacted, would revoke the promises and guarantees the Queen made to Māori in 1814. Principle 2 does not recognise that tino rangatiratanga is a concept of collective political authority with its own set of rights not determined or governed by the Crown, whether a treaty settlement has been settled or not. The Crown does not hold overarching political authority over Māori. This principle ignores the fact that Te Tiriti clearly guarantees tino rangatiratanga and therefore Māori determined rights to Māori political and institutional entities. Treaty Principle 3, talk about gaslighting. 173 years of specific legislation discriminating against Māori, and you guys are going to tell us about discrimination. I'm the grandson of Lieutenant Colonel Arapita Awatere, who commanded the Māori Battalion in World War II, and I'm the grandnephew of Major Te Okanga Ozzy Huata, Canon Witato Huata, and Ranapia Dick Huata, who also served in the Māori Battalion. Their father, Hemi Huata, was convinced to give our land into Wairua to the Crown as part of the war ballot. And when these war heroes returned after sacrificing their life for Britain, their lands were not given back. They were given to Pākehā soldiers. In fact, 96% of all the lands on the ballot were given to Pākehā soldiers. And get this, some of that land was kept by the Crown, and now our settlement trust in Te Wairua has to purchase it back at market rate. Give me a break. Don't talk to us about discrimination when colonial history is riddled with discriminatory acts against Māori. But hey, seeing as this government has never and will never honour their end of the bargain, and seeing as you've only given me 5 minutes, I'll stop wasting my breath and use this as an opportunity to raise awareness about what's happening in Roto Kakahi, because Te Arawa Lakes Council is trying to ram through a shit pipe through their lake and whenua. Secondly, I'd like to shout out to all my friends at whānau who are standing at Te Matatini. Free Sudan, free West Papua, free Congo, free Kanaki, free Palestine, free Aotearoa from racists, bigots, homophobes, transphobes, and toi tutabana Māori motuhaki. Kia ora.
Thank you, Te Otāne, for your submission this afternoon. We ran a little bit over, but I did take up some of your time telling you off, so I thought that'd be right to give you a little bit of extra time. So thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Yes.
Members, we're now going to go to our submission from John Robinson. John is with us in person. Good afternoon, John. Thank you for being with us. We have you before us for 10 minutes today, so I'll hand over to you to provide your presentation.
Hi, my name is John Robinson. I'm a scientist. Between 1986 and 2002, I gathered statistics of Maori social experiences to form a set of social indicators. The indicators started some years earlier and were updated each year. Much of that work was for Ngati Love, both when he was a professor at Massey University and as CEO of Te Puni Kōkiri. I found that many measures showed reducing differences between Maori and others. I also realised that the differences were those of class and not of ethnicity, as did other social scientists I spoke with. So there was quite a learning curve there, studying the gaps between Maori and non-Maori experiences. One example showing both observations was a graph of trends in life expectancy. The differences between Maori and others in life expectancy reduced from 20 years in 1940, a big gap, to around 5 to 6 years in 1984 as Maori moved to the cities, becoming more integrated. The downward trend, suggested that the ethnic difference would be gone by around 2000. But then the policy of privatisation and free trade resulted in high and persistent unemployment, which created hardship amongst working class Maori. The downward trend reversed and the gap went up to 9 years before settling at around 6 to 7 years. Recent claims of harm from colonisation that have been made based on data for 1 year only have been ignorant and wrong, and just not knowing of that trend and the way it changed with the policy change. I had been free to reach conclusions based solely on my analysis of the facts. That was one reason why Ngā Tātou Love continued to employ me. But then around 2000, I met up with a demand for politically correct research. I had to rewrite a report for the Crown Forestry Rental Trust since I had failed to reach their conclusion of a disastrous impact of colonisation, which my analysis did not show. A great deal of official information is biased and incorrect, and I was part of that system. Well, not part of the system. And I could not continue under those requirements. In retirement, I've been studying and writing about New Zealand history, from first settlement to the present time, to find out the true story. In that way, I've gained an understanding of what is threatened, what is desired. This is complete apartheid. The Meteke Mai report to the Iwi Chairs Forum and the Hei Puapua government report have described the desired future in Vision 2040, a completely divided nation having two separate race-based systems and governments. Such knowledge is silenced. Like others, I've no freedom of speech. Meetings have been interrupted by shouting demonstrators, forcing many meetings to be called off and blocking public debate. There have been calls by Television New Zealand for my books for trust publishing to be banned and kept out of schools and bookstores. I've been called racist with no right of response, although I ask for equality. I'm opposed to racism. In reaction, I set down my three-step definition of racism. First, a belief in race. In New Zealand, a Maori is defined as a member of the Maori race, so that is written into legislation. Second is classification of people by race. Third is different treatments and rights based on race, and these are widespread in New Zealand. Those fighting against racism, including Nelson Mandela when facing South African apartheid, have called for equality as the core to a solution, as does the United Nations Declaration on Universal Rights. In the words of Martin Luther King, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by their character. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People includes a similar statement, a forthright condemnation of discrimination and racism, affirming further that all doctrines, policies and practices based on or advocating superiority of peoples or individuals on the basis of national origin or racial, religious, ethnic or cultural differences are racist, scientifically false, legally invalid, morally condemnable and socially unjust. That statement negates all calls for special treatments of Indigenous people over others, which are included in that declaration. The declaration is a contradictory document obviously written by a committee who could not reach agreement. It is rubbish. Again and again, we're faced with flawed information. I've just given you a brief look at some of my experience on how it's produced. We could spend a great deal of time arguing over revisionist presentism history and the rewritten versions of the Treaty of Waitangi, but I have chosen to concentrate on the key issue. The universal principles set down in this bill point in the right direction. They are for equality, all of us, for sovereignty of a united nation, and for security of land ownership. All are essential features of a decent society. But what do they want, those who oppose this bill? Not equality. They, the select Indigenous people, are to have power over all others. And I am referencing where this is written down in Haipua. Not unity, but sovereignty held by iwi and hapu across the land, a fragmented tribal society. No security of property ownership. If you don't believe that that happens now, consider the experiences of Alan Titford. Remember that, Alan Titford and Julian Batchelor, to get some idea of what that means. In the words of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, such doctrines advocating that superiority of race are morally condemnable and socially unjust. They are unacceptable. So here's the fundamental question facing New Zealand today. What sort of society do we want? Are we to be defined and divided by race, or are we one people? And the challenge to you today, members of Parliament, is given in my written submission. Every member of the New Zealand Parliament should be prepared to sign up to these three basic principles for our country and to say so now. We all together must speak out clearly for equality and against racial division. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your submission this afternoon. That brings us to the end of the 10 minutes we have today. So just on behalf of the committee, I want to acknowledge you for being here and just thank you for providing your submission.
Pardon?
Just want to say thank you for being with us and for providing your submission. Okay, folks, we are now on track to hear a submission from Alan McKenzie. So if we have Alan.
You do.
And Paula, perhaps.
Online.
Paula's online. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for being with the committee. We have you for a 5-minute slot this afternoon. We'll wait till Paula joins us. Kia ora, Paula, thank you for joining us. We've got Alan in the room, so who would like to lead off and I'll hand over?
I think for introduction it should sit with tangata whenua.
Okay, Paula, we'll hand over to you.
Oh, that's brave. Tēnā koutou e te tipu, ko Paula Paranihi taku ingoa. Alan is my husband, so Paula McKenzie. Tēnā tātou. My husband has submitted, have I got Kia ora, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. My husband has already put in his submissions. We're going to take it as read. And we're quite happy. Husband has a few key points he wants to put out, but I don't want to take up any time except to address the previous gentleman that just at the table. What tends to happen here is people will say something, walk away because time runs out, but I want to respond to that gentleman because I'm one of the they he was talking about, the fragmented they. And as Māori, we've got enough of this disinformation going on about our people. So I just want to quickly say, since October 2023 and prior to, there's been a rise in harassment and aggression toward our people. That gentleman is just another example for that aggression. It would be negligent to ignore our concerns for social cohesion. Our people have been continually represented as bottom feeders, gravy train elites, violent gangsters and criminals. We are labelled as racists, as that gentleman just did, and apartheid supporters, primitive descendants of cannibals, and dare we say it, colonisers that have invaded our own whenua, and we've had enough. And my husband and I believe that needs to be checked by this government. So while we're here, I specifically, my husband and I want to congratulate and thank the 300,000 submitters and all of those that have put in their opposition to this bill. And we congratulate them for doing the heavy lifting the coalition government should have been doing, which is to protect Te Reo Waitangi, protect the treaty partner, which is our people, and by default protect all New Zealanders. This bill is just another road to more harassment and aggression we are continually getting, which has grown since 2023. I'm going to stop there and let my husband take the floor. So kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, Paula. Thank you, Alan.
By way of introduction, I'm a Scottish-Danish citizen of New Zealand. I recognise that my citizen rights come under Te Tiriti, and as far as my country goes, I am proud to say that I love the country of Aotearoa. So on page 3 of the submission, we've put out some summary points, but I'd like to draw your attention to just a few. Firstly, the recognition of the Declaration of Independence, whakaputanga, is actually recorded in British law. So that was the first indication that Britain recognised the sovereignty of Maori. I've got references for where you might be able to find that in Holsbury's law, but let us know if you'd like me to send those to. As far as the treaty itself is concerned, the treaty is heavy on intent and principle, and given the times that it was signed in, not so heavy on prescription and legalese. And that's kind of good for me because I recognise the spirit and intent of Te Tiriti. And what I do read in the Maori version or the Maori text of that document is that there was an attempt to actually say, we're sovereign to this country. You have some Brits here that are living, at the time of signing, about 180,000 Maori to about 2,000 to 5,000 settlers. Through generosity of spirit, we're prepared to actually work with the Brits to look after their own here in this land. So that's how I read the Treaty of Waitangi. As far as the principles of the treaty bill are concerned, I'm not a lawyer. I'm pretty sure I haven't found out that Paula's a lawyer yet, so neither of us are lawyers, but we know what the statement of, what the intent and the purpose of Te Tiriti was. And what we find in the bill is that it in no way matches up what was the original founding document of this country with what is an attempt to actually give it some legal clarity. Lastly, I think in summary of these key points, our reading of this bill is politically motivated. It is motivated by an intention to remove the legal obstacles and roadblocks to commercialisation without the need to consider Te Tiriti. And it also is motivated, I believe, by an attempt to grab votes on the National Act spectrum, and the justification for this bill by the sponsors of the bill is barely masked and hardly cloaked in what is basically a vote grab. So with that, I'll leave it there. I see that I'm 10 minutes out of time. Thanks for your time and thanks for listening to our submission.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Paula, for joining us online as well. Thank you both for taking the time to be with the committee this afternoon and for providing a presentation. We appreciate it. We'll go now to submission from Zhiyuan Bastogne Lu. And I think Zhiyuan's joining us online.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me fine?
Yes, we can. Thanks for joining the committee. We've got you for 5 minutes this afternoon. I'll hand over to you straight away.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor for me to be speaking to you today about why I support the principles embodied into the Treaty Principles Bill. First of all, a quick introduction about myself. I know that for my friends on the left, the identity matters, intersectionality matters. So I'm a first-generation immigrant from China. been in this country for 11 years, almost 11 years. I live with I have a happy family with my wife and my 2-year-old son, who's born a New Zealand citizen. I wouldn't have come here and speak to you today if I didn't look into the eyes of my son and ask him, does he deserve any more right than any other New Zealander? My answer is a firm no. Does he deserve any less right than any other New Zealander? My answer is also no. Okay, let's focus on the three principles that are set out in the bill. The first principle is really about sovereignty. Let's assume that the opposite side is correct. In this country, we indeed have two separate sovereignties. What the word sovereignty actually means, and sovereignty as a concept originated from the 17th century French philosopher Zhiyuan Bastogne Lu, who actually defined sovereignty as the absolute authority of a monarch. If we're saying we have two separate sovereignties, we're essentially saying we need two separate states. I recall one recent example in recent history, which is the apartheid South African government. Under the name of granting independence and sovereignty to indigenous African tribes, they established 14 Bantustans, even opened embassies for this newly created state in South African capital. And the only difference it made is that the indigenous African people would still come and work in the white-dominated South African cities, but they will be treated as alien foreign workers, stripped of all citizenship rights. I wonder if this is the path my friends on the left are truly willing and mindful of going down. Second principle is basically about how private property should be protected and how past wrongs must be corrected. I don't think anybody will have any issues with that. However, there's one critical point that I like to get across, which is that if we all agree that privileges shouldn't be inherited, then neither should victimhood. Because otherwise, we're essentially talking about the difference between a modern conditional employment contract and a medieval slavery indenture. And the third principle is basically about how everyone should be treated equally in front of the law. So if we assume the opposite side to be true, and that we indeed want to afford different people based on their identity groups or ethnicities with different sets of rights and responsibilities. Okay, one recent example I can recall, based on my limited understanding of history, would be Nazi Germany through the 1935 Nuremberg laws, who actually rather scientifically or systematically defined who could be considered Jewish. And by tracing back at least 5 generations, looking at the percentage of one's grandparents who can be then considered Jewish. I wonder if this is the path that my friends on the left are truly willing to go down. This brings to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Zhiyuan. Thank you for your submission. We've got a question from Simon Court.
Thank you, Zhiyuan. I'm interested in your perspective as somebody who's lived in New Zealand for 11 years. How important is it to you as a recent immigrant in New Zealand that all New Zealanders are equal before the law and have equal rights? And how is that different to your experience in the country you grew up in?
When I left my home country, which is China in this case, as someone who's actually spent even the minimal time available to read about recent history, you would know how much the turmoil upheaval that my country, including Soviet Union and many other countries behind Iron Curtain, have gone through in the last century or so. I mean, I just want to quickly mention a catchphrase during the Cultural Revolution. I believe my friends on the Green Party will probably know this. That is, 老子英雄而好汉，老子反动而混蛋, which basically saying that the sons of the heroes are still heroes, and the sons of the bastards are still bastards. This is the type of indoctrination that they were trying to pass down to people back then. I would have thought I already left that behind me.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Zhiyuan. Thank you for your submission this afternoon. We do appreciate you being with us to provide it.
Thank you.
We will now move to our submission from the Pacific Panthers. I think they're joining us online as well.
Kia ora.
Kia ora te ao. Thank you for being with us. We've got you for a 10-minute submission this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
He ao te roa. A cloud, Aotearoa. A change is coming, and that change must begin now. Talofa lava, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Te Ao Pritchard, and I stand here as a member of the Pacific Panthers, activists, artists, and advocates in unwavering solidarity with tangata whenua. Ka mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Our written submission has been read, and I acknowledge the incredible contributions that have deepened my learning and sharpened my understanding. I stand here in unwavering solidarity with you all and with those yet to come. I send aroha and manaki wairua to rotoka kahi, who stand in the very struggle we are here to protect tino rangatiratanga. To the top, to the 55 rōpū at te matatini, I cheer you on. To taranaki iwi, I mihi kia koutou, as exemplars of what it means to stand in your full power, your full sovereignty, tino rangatiratanga. I am here to oppose this bill. Ka whawhai tonu mātou, ake. My whakapapa ties me to Māori, Samoan and British histories. I know firsthand the legacy of colonisation. On one hand, my British ancestors, specifically Reverend George Pritchard, the British consul to Tahiti and Samoa between 1824 and 1856, sought to replace the native practices of those lands with civilised Christian ideas. This colonial mindset attempted to sever people from their cultural roots, identity and tino rangatiratanga. On the other side, my Samoan whakapapa, through my ancestor Atarina Baker, the daughter of a taupo, a princess, and granddaughter of a high-ranking chief of Manono, carries the strengths of resilience. My Samoan ancestors maintained their village living, language and food sovereignty, continuing to resist the erasure of their pule au tino rangatiratanga. This triple heritage, Māori, Samoan and British, shapes who I am today. I stand here not only because of the colonial systems that sought to erase and redefine my ancestors' identity, but because of the resilience that runs through both my Māori and Samoan bloodlines. The connection between these heritages is why I fight to protect Māori sovereignty and resist the continued impacts of colonisation. Why this bill must end? The Treaty Principles Bill is a direct assault on the essence of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This is not a simple matter of changing legal language. It's about altering the very foundation of the relationship between Māori and the Crown. The bill attempts to redefine and narrow the interpretation of Te Tiriti principles in a way that diminishes Māori sovereignty and erodes the rights and protections guaranteed to the treaty. It's an effort to strip away the power and self-determination of tangata whenua, all under the guise of modernising the relationship between the Crown and Māori. But we cannot modernise what was never broken, and we cannot strip away the strengths and principles of Te Tiriti to serve a neoliberal agenda. Māori sovereignty is not a bargaining chip. It is not a negotiable concept that can be watered down or redefined to suit political convenience. Tino rangatiratanga and leadership of tangata whenua must not and will not be erased from the political, cultural and legal fabric of this nation. The hypocrisy of national Te Tiriti. Te Matatini just received $50 million in funding from this government, a symbolic act of supporting Māori culture. Meanwhile, Luxon's National Party is legislating the removal of Māori rights through the Statutory Regulations Bill. This is nothing but performative politics. The real agenda, the corporate takeover. Let's talk about what's really at play here. This bill, alongside the Statutory Regulations Bill, represents more than just a change in legal language. It's part of a broader neoliberal agenda that seeks to reduce Māori sovereignty to an afterthought. These bills are not isolated events. They are part of a larger, calculated attempt to marginalise Māori rights and promote Māori corporate interests at the expense of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. At the core of this agenda is a push to normalise a neoliberal free market ideology that prioritises profit over people, especially Māori. The statutory regulations bill has the potential to weaken protections for Māori, land and resources, further commodifying our whenua and diminishing the ability of tangata whenua to exercise true authority over the lands. It's no surprise that figures like David Seymour, who have been associated with pro-corporate interests and neoliberal policies, are so supportive of these bills. Seymour's backing of the statutory regulations bill and the treaty principles bill is an extension of the neoliberal agenda to privatise and centralise power, eroding the principles of te tiriti in the process. These bills are part of a larger system that consistently devalues Māori authority and self-determination. And make no mistake, they will not stop at the treaty. They will continue to erode Māori rights unless we stand up and stop them now. ACT's role in the legislative agenda. The role in this must be called out. The push for these bills is not simply an ideological difference. It's part of a strategic effort to dismantle Māori sovereignty in favour of corporate agendas. ACT's claim that the treaty principles were never clearly defined is a convenient myth used to justify policies that undermine Māori rights. But the treaty is not a vague document. It is clear, it is binding, and it has shaped the nation's relationship with tangata whenua for over 180 years. ACT's attempt to rewrite the principles of te tiriti is a direct attack on the relationship between Māori and Crown, ultimately Māori sovereignty itself. As a country, we must reject ACT's efforts to redefine the treaty principles to set the neoliberal agenda. Māori rights, mana and sovereignty must not be subject to the whims of corporate interests or political convenience. The role of the Prime Minister and the Coalition. The Prime Minister lacks in support for the statutory regulations bill, and the treaty principles bill is an endorsement of policies that weaken Māori sovereignty. It's ironic, his government claims to uphold parliamentary sovereignty while ignoring the sovereignty of Māori under te tiriti or Waitangi. Luxon's refusal to address the issue head-on in his support of bills that undermine Māori authority demonstrated deep inconsistency of his leadership. He must halt the progression of these bills and publicly commit to protecting Māori rights under te tiriti. It's not enough to hide behind coalition agreements or claim these actions align with democracy. Real democracy, true sovereignty, and real justice require recognising Māori sovereignty as equal to that of the Crown. There can be no sovereignty without upholding Māori sovereignty. Call to action, stand with us. This is more than just a debate over two bills. It is a call to action, a call to defend the very principles on which this nation was founded. We call on the government to halt these bills now. To the panel, you have a choice to challenge this bill, or will you be a part of another chapter of colonial erosion? This is not just a Māori issue, it's a national issue. We call upon all Aotearoa to stand in solidarity with tangata whenua. We will not let tino rangatiratanga be eroded. We will not let this happen again. Protect te tiriti now. And in closing, as we stand together in the legacy of our tupuna, we walk forward to a future where te tiriti lives and Māori sovereignty thrives. Ngā mihi. And I just want to also acknowledge those who have passed before us and the great work of our tupuna that have gone into building and creating a space where we can thrive and move into our greatness, which we were born from. Tihei Mauri ora.
Thank you, Tia. Thank you for your submission this afternoon. Members, are there any questions? I don't see any questions from the group, so just force me to thank you for being with the committee this afternoon and for providing your views and your submission. It's very helpful.
Yora.
We are now going to move on to an next submission from Alison McDougall. So Alison is not in the room. Alison's online as well. Good. Alison, kia ora, thank you for being with the committee. We've got you for a 5-minute session this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to start your presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Kia ora koutou. I make my submission as a private individual who's worked in the health sector for the last 20 years, mostly in the public service. I strongly oppose this bill for the impact it will have on the public service's ability to deliver fair and responsive services for New Zealanders. I also make this submission as a sixth-generation Pākehā New Zealander. Some of my ancestors arrived here as soldiers to fight in the Northern and Waikato Wars. Many Pākehā share this history, but what we don't talk about enough is the century that followed, where iwi and hapu were alienated from their economic base by a framework of laws intended to suppress Māori culture and assimilate Māori into Pākehā life. Many of us are ignorant to the scale of this injustice, and this bill leverages that ignorance with a sales pitch that the treaty and its principles somehow privilege Māori, rhetoric which, with knowledge of our past, I find to be morally reprehensible and ethically bankrupt. Mr. Seymour tells us the problem with the existing treaty principles is that they're undemocratic, formulated by a small number of people in the Waitangi Tribunal and courts without input from the public. This bill is supposed to solve that problem by offering us a predefined set of principles formulated by a small number of people in government without input from the public. Development of treaty principles is portrayed in this way as a perfunctory administrative procedure that ignores their socio-cultural impact. The tribunal and courts engage in a dynamic conversation as treaty claims and issues bubble up, ensuring our interpretations of the treaty keep pace with views and structure of society. Concepts like partnership and self-determination that are embedded in the treaty's articles undoubtedly meant different things to people in 1840 as they did in 1975 or they do today. Codifying the principles makes them static. It's an attempt to reset the clock to zero, and with the stroke of a pen, we're all equal now. But what it really does is make sure everybody just keeps what we already have. Māori disparities remain, and Māori involvement at all levels of society, as guaranteed by Te Tiriti, is curtailed. The principles in this bill seek to enshrine libertarian political ideology into New Zealand law in the shape of equality. In any society, equality is a difficult state to manifest because individuals are diverse with a plethora of unique needs, and the pursuit of equality tends to lead to a flat, universal approach to public provision. When we design services universally to meet everyone's needs equally, we often end up not meeting many people's needs at all because the level of commonality that needs to exist between all of us for at least some of us to have our needs met becomes very, very narrow. The way we usually deal with that is to design programs and services that focus on groups of people with similar needs. In the context of this bill, we're told that process preferences Māori above others because of their treaty relationship. But in my work, I've seen and heard from Māori people who find themselves navigating a system that often isn't designed to meet their needs at all. Public services have historically been made under the assumption that the non-Māori way is good for everyone. Data and experience demonstrate it frequently isn't. The existing treaty principles give us in the public service the mandate to work in a way that acknowledges and addresses that. The principles in this bill do not. It is my genuine and profound fear that if the current principles, referenced in more than 40 individual statutes in New Zealand law, are replaced by the principles in this bill, I, as a public servant, will no longer be able to work in ways that best meet the needs of all New Zealand people. Not only Māori, but anyone, because we'll be bound to operate within an ideology that denies the existence of difference and disparity at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Are there any questions from the committee? No, there appear to be none. So just on behalf of the committee, I want to thank you, Alison, for being with us this afternoon and providing your submission. I know 5 minutes is not a huge amount of time, but you covered a lot of territory. So just want to acknowledge your presentation today.
Thank you.
We are going to go now to a submission from Kay Harrison. Kay is with us in the room. Good afternoon, Kate. Nice to see you again. Thanks for being with the committee. We have you scheduled in for 5 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you. Rai rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. I will address 3 points that I have personal expertise in, as in my career I have been a history teacher, a treaty settlements negotiator for the Crown, and New Zealand's climate change ambassador, leading negotiations on another international treaty, the Paris Agreement. The bill proposes to constrain retrospectively the rights of iwi and hapu to what they agreed in the context of treaty settlements. This is unjust. As a person who negotiated treaty settlements on behalf of the Crown, I categorically state that no such limitations to the ongoing operation of the treaty were envisioned, discussed, or agreed in the settlement processes that I was involved with. Rather, we negotiated what breaches of the treaty had occurred and the ways the Crown could agree to go some way to addressing historical injustices. A decision by Parliament now to limit iwi and hapu treaty rights going forward is unjust. My second point is that as a former international treaty negotiator for New Zealand, I can assure the committee that treaties are often difficult to interpret and that the parties involved need to work out their differences through ongoing engagement. This is the case with, for example, the Paris Agreement on climate change. We did not succeed in nailing down the global solution to climate change when countries concluded that treaty in 2015. We then spent years negotiating rules for its operation, and still with the rules in place, countries meet every year to test, question, and hopefully improve the delivery of the Paris Treaty's goals in light of changing circumstances. The Treaty of Waitangi is similarly a living arrangement that is questioned and tested and acted upon regularly. We have set up useful and respected ways to do this through legislation, courts, treaty settlements, and the Waitangi Tribunal. We are fortunate to have a treaty, an arrangement that has allowed us to address and improve the complexities of living in a shared land since 1840. It can continue to do so if not reinterpreted to reduce the rights agreed within it. As a former teacher of history, I know that the circumstances of 1840 were very different from 2025. Māori outnumbered Pākehā, the Māori language was lingua franca. I know too that wars, the confiscation of land, the destruction of taonga and wahitapu, and the suppression of Māori culture followed that very different world of 1840. These periods of hurt are our history. This bill may appear to seek to do something innocent, provide clarity, and many New Zealanders might find that appealing, especially Pākehā who struggle with the complexities of the treaty and the horrible aspects of our history. Sadly, the confusion or amnesia that leads to some finding this bill appealing is the very reason it should not proceed. I do not support the bill.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you for your submission and for being with us today. Members, do you have any questions for Kay following her submission? Simon Court.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Kay. Fascinating to hear about your experience. Based on your experience, are you aware if the treaty, Te Tiriti, in either English or Te Reo Māori, includes the words principles or makes any reference to principles?
As a former submitter said, the treaty is actually very high level and does not include the word principles, but neither does the treaty principles bill include principles. It actually includes a rewriting of the articles of the treaty.
Just to sup on that, if it's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
When the concept of principles first stated by Parliament in the 1975 Treaty of Waitangi Act, and therefore why shouldn't Parliament legislate to define principles? I mean, I know you claim that the principles in this bill aren't principles, but don't you think Parliament should be able to define them if Parliament put them into a piece of legislation in 1975 in the first place?
Parliament is free to explore any law it wishes to. And fortunately, in this democracy, we have the opportunity to point out when the ideas put forward, such as this one, are a very bad idea.
Just further sup. So is it a bad idea to state that the government has the power to govern in the best interests of anybody? Crown recognises the rights of iwi and hapu when they signed the treaty, and everyone's equal before the law, entitled to equal protection?
Well, I think we both know that that's not what you're trying to do here.
That's what it says.
Okay, it's probably...
What are we trying to do then?
that's probably where we'll end up with the submission. So look, thank you, Kate, for being with us this afternoon. Thank you for answering the committee's questions. We do appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you.
We'll move now to our submission from Immanuel Koks, and Immanuel is online. Immanuel, thank you for joining the committee. We've got you for a 5-minute presentation this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin. You're on mute, sorry, Immanuel.
Sorry about that. Thank you for having me today. I want to start briefly by saying I think this whole process is in bad faith. Two peoples came together to sign the treaty. And it feels like one of those signatory groups is saying we've got the right to define how that is now interpreted. That's bad faith. Both parties need to be part of the conversation. The second thing is, I'm a theologian, and my bread and butter is working with text, and in particular working with old texts. And one of the questions we need to ask is, how do we interpret this old text for today? The most important step one is to ask what the old text meant in its original context. And there is no way that the Māori signatories to the principles would have understood and known the neoliberal principles that are being enshrined in this legislation. Therefore, my argument is that this bill does not help us interpret the treaty well. Rather, it is an attempt to enshrine neoliberal politics and neoliberal principles into New Zealand law at a very fundamental level. I'm not sure in this multicultural country that that's a good idea. But one of the main issues is neoliberalism puts the individual at the center. Individual land ownership, individual rights, individual property. And this is a very different mindset to the mindset of tangata whenua. And one of the most important parts of that is the idea of equality. But as a disabled person, I know that if you treated me absolutely equal and assumed that all people can climb stairs, I wouldn't be able to get into most public buildings. The fact is, you need to make steps to build equality before you can to build equity before you can have equality. And so this bill is fundamentally wrong, and I oppose it strongly. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you for your submission this afternoon. That brings us probably to the end of the 5 minutes. So just on behalf of the committee, thank you for taking the time to be with us slightly later in the day, and we do appreciate your contribution. We now have a submission from Ngā Hapu o Ahipara ki te Rarawa, and we should be joined by Ruben Taipari. Just so everyone knows, we are running about 10 minutes behind, but we should be completed today by about 2:45. Kia ora, Ruben. Thank you for being with the committee. We have you scheduled in for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to start your presentation.
Tēnā koutou. All right, thank you. I'll use the 10 minutes wisely. Just to like to explain to everybody, it's a bit noisy. I'm at a occupation and roto kakahi in Te Arawa on my mother's side, Tūhoi. But I'm making a submission on behalf of my iwi from Muri Whenua of Te Arawa, in particular to Ahipara and to the mahi kaitiaki that we do there in the Mount Tōneroa Tohe and all of our surrounding rohe. So this is my submission. I take it that you've read my submission. It was quite personal and quite lengthy. I decided to give a submission on the passing of Whaitariana Tūria, inspired me to make a submission, and so through that I'll explain to where I stand. First of all, I'd like to say that though this is a submission, this is in no way being submissive in my account and my explanation around Waitangi. Te Tiriti o Waitangi, sorry. So Te Tiriti o Waitangi is a very personal matter for me. My tūpuna signs Te Tiriti o Waitangi me whakaputanga. So it is a personal document, it's a covenant. It precedes New Zealand government. It precedes all of any acts from 1860 to 1880 up to 1975. It is something of high value, what we call a taonga tuku iwa. And in that stance is where I'm very passionate about protecting the quality and the integrity of Te Tiriti o Waitangi for myself, for my children, and for my mokopuna, as my tūpuna signed it. So in my submission, you'll see that I'm very passionate about Te Tiriti o Waitangi and its personal capacity to protect the rights of iwi Māori. I understand that this process called the Treaty Principles Bill, it negates that concept that Te Tiriti o Waitangi was for Māori. But if you have a look into the history of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that was what the purpose of the document was about. So I totally oppose this idea around having a Treaty Principles Bill. It should never have entered into government in the first place. The coalition, I feel, is insulting to iwi Māori by even allowing it through as a tradable commodity. I was a part of the coalition's agreement, and they're using a covenant that comes from my tūpuna, who signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi, Pane Karao, Pone Heke, Rātou mā, I haina tia tō tātou tiriti a kawiti mā, me te whakapūtanga tōku tūpuna tēnā ko Hemi Kepa Tupe. So all of these ancestors, this is something very personal to me. This is something that you're taking away from me, you're taking away from my children and from my mokopuna, this protectorate, this endeavour to protect my rights as Māori. For example, I'm here in confrontation with police right now. As we speak, they are kuari, which means that they are ignorant. They don't know and understand Te Tiriti o Waitangi, let alone the principles. And yet I have to negotiate a conversation with these kuari, with these people here who don't respect Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Even though under your law, you have an obligation to respect Te Tiriti o Waitangi, we have to continuously take a stand. We have to fight. We have to defend Te Tiriti o Waitangi and everything that endeavours to protect for our people, which is our environment, which is our rights, our culture, our language. To this day, there has never been anything that Māori have achieved without a protest, without their issue to fight. It has been to Tiriti Waitangi that has been one of the most important documents to protect our rights in order to lift our people from the oppression and the colonization and the segregation that we were put through the colonial era of the 1800s. It's to Tiriti Waitangi that will continue to protect us in this generation and into the future going forward. So to the Select Committee, I make a strong stance of opposition to whatever you guys are going through right now, regardless of whatever's happening in your political forums and in your parliament chambers. You should never have entered into this. This should never be done. It is against the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples. It's against United Nations. It's against anything of integrity to protect Indigenous people. We are Indigenous people of this country. We're not New Zealanders. I am a Māori. My tupuna, my whakapapa comes from my tupuna and from my atua of Ngāpuhi, Tūhoi, Te Rarawa, Ngāti Kahu, and to name a few. So I'm very passionate about this process, to have this opportunity to speak to you. I appreciate this process, but by no means do you think that I concede or I'm submissive in my kōrero to you. So I'll welcome any debate, any kōrero according to the submission that I gave you last month. I'm happy to take any questions now. Tēnā koutou, kōrero mai.
Thank you for your submission. Thank you for speaking to your written submission as well. Members, there's a few minutes remaining in the time here, so if anyone has any questions, please put them forward. We've got a question there from Simon Court.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your submission, including your written submission, Ruben. I just want to understand, do you believe that people of Māori descent have different rights in New Zealand compared to those who don't have a Māori ancestor?
Tēnā koe, Simon. This is a question that needs expansion upon, and what we like to call a wānanga. It's not a straightforward yes or no question. For me, I will help everybody and anybody of this country. It's got nothing to do with race. If there is a person in need who is an African or an Asian or a Pākehā or a Māori, you need to help them, to lift them up. This is what we call tikanga Māori. And if you understand tikanga, you will understand the prevalence of te tiriti mā or waitangi. This is the difference within our cultures. And that's what segregates our cultures, is in our difference of understandings around our philosophies and our principles, Simon. What we need to do is we need to create legislation that enhances and supports the well-being of people. All people, which I fully support. I expect Pākehā to be an honourable tiriti partner. It's not just for Māori to defend tiriti o Waitangi, it's for both of us to defend it and to understand it. So I hope you wish you well on your journey to understanding te tiriti o Waitangi.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if there's time for a brief supplementary question.
Yes, there are no furthers up, so Simon Court.
Thank you. Ruben, I really appreciate your perspective there. I'm wondering if you might reflect on one of the principles of the Treaty Principles Bill, which is the Government of New Zealand has the full power to govern, Parliament has the full power to make laws in the best interests of everyone. Is that a good expression of what you mean when you say that we have a duty to uplift everyone equally?
That statement that you make is under coercion. It's under duress that statement was made. We are treaty partners. It's not for you to roll over the top of us and tell us what to do and how to live. It is for you to understand that where we come from, we come to this potential for a great future together, Simon. And in that, you need to understand and recognise our sovereignty, our tino rangatiratanga, that comes from a perspective of kanohi Māori. If you want to make a opinion, you need to understand it from both sides, not just the Pākehā side, but also from the Māori side, Simon. I just want to take this opportunity and show you where I sit right now. I sit here on this lake, Roto Kākahi, with all of my whanaunga here, and we're sitting here with defending this awa, this roto, this lake, not for our own personal well-being. We're doing it for the generations to come, for those who want to be a part of this country and to benefit from the well-being that you're talking about. So here we sit, you and I, Simon, on different sides of the desk. And I hope that you understand and you connect to what I'm trying to say, and you take it as some sort of a process from which you can continue on your journey to understand where we come from and why Te Tiriti o Waitangi is so important to everybody of this country. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Ruben, and kia ora. Just briefly, I'm wondering, do you think there's a mutual benefit for all New Zealanders, say for infrastructure that protects the environment from wastewater overflows, allowed to be built for the benefit of everybody? Because I'm not quite sure how stopping a wastewater pipeline project is helping benefit the environment or any of us. Would you care to explain that and what you mean, how the Treaty of Waitangi might influence decision makers around things like a wastewater pipe?
Very briefly, I can give you a perspective. Te Tiriti o Waitangi gives me the right to sit here and to have that dialogue and to make that statement. That's number one. Number two, in regards to the technology of today and the potential of creating different solutions and different ideas, this is what we want to try to introduce and to see the perspective of. Rather than just having wastewater pipes running out into the clarity and the beauty of this particular lake or any river, whether it's the Hokianga or whether it's Roto Kakahi, that we have to advance and we have to have aspirations of having better services for the future of our children, in particular with our taiao, with our environment, but across the board on everything within our culture, educational, social, political, everything that we can think of. We want to have a better future for our children, Simon. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Ruben. Thank you for your submission this afternoon and for answering the committee's questions. We appreciate you being here with us, given that you were doing it from a relatively remote setting. So just want to acknowledge that and thank you for your presentation today.
Ka pai. Kia ora tātou.
We are now going to invite Amanda O'Hagan to join us. Amanda, thank you for being with the committee this afternoon. We have you for 5 minutes today, so I will put that on the clock and then hand over to you to start your presentation.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for having me here today to speak on my submission. I oppose the Treaty Principles Bill. I think it is insulting and degrading. I'm going to raise 2 points today. One expands on my submission, and the second is about the idea of privilege. My first point is about belonging and having a secure identity. I was born in England and arrived here as a backpacker about 20 years ago, and I decided to stay. I live in a Pākehā community. One of the reasons why Te Tiriti o Waitangi has gained strength and influence in my life is through policy and law. For example, through taking my kids through Play Centre, I learned about tikanga because it is woven into the early childhood curriculum Te Whariki. Through the treaty principles, I have learned the meaning of partnership beyond consultation, not only with Māori, but with everyone. Partnership, among many things, means listening and having an open mind. And when I listened, I learned about tikanga. For example, the concept of whakapapa. When someone says, where do you whakapapa to? I know what this means. It means, what is your relationship to this place? How do you fit? How do you hold space here? How do you belong? By learning about my whakapapa, I have begun to understand how I am connected to Aotearoa. I'm able to feel a stronger sense of identity. I gain an understanding of how I fit. Of course, whakapapa has always existed in Aotearoa, and it will always be here despite any new laws. And where I come from in England, there is no such thing as whakapapa. There is actually no way to easily communicate what it means. As I don't live in a Māori community, policy and law is an important channel through which Te Tiriti o Waitangi becomes meaningful in my life. So from my perspective, I am worried that the Treaty Principles Bill has the potential to undermine tikanga. Tauiwi like myself could find it harder to understand how we belong. If we don't know how we belong, how can we feel secure? I argue that the principles are especially important for Tauiwi like myself, who arrive here with no understanding of our history. My second point is about the issue of Māori being perceived as having extra privileges. In my opinion, privilege is a problematic rhetoric. A better framing is justice. Most of us understand that colonisation is detrimental to Māori in many ways. The New Zealand government has suppressed Māori knowledge, language, spirituality, strategies of environmental, political and economic governance. This also negatively impacts Māori health. I understand this as an injustice. When issues related to colonisation are addressed through the lens of justice, supported by the treaty principles, it creates a space for coexistence and friendship. If you understand them as creating undeserved privileges for Māori, then this creates a space for anger and hatred. For example, the Māori Health Authority. This was established through recommendations made by the Waitangi Tribunal based on years of research. The research was underpinned by the treaty principles. Through a justice lens, the Māori Health Authority was set up to address inequities within the current system as a result of colonisation. Disappointedly, it was disestablished before it had the chance to make a difference. Through the lens that frames this programme as providing extra privileges for Māori, it creates a space for division and racism. And it was racism that underpins many of the laws that justified colonisation. I don't want my kids growing up in a place where efforts to address inequity are framed as undeserved privileges. If we address Te Tiriti o Waitangi through the lens of justice, it frames partnership in a constructive and opportunistic way. In my opinion, the Treaty Principles Bill is degrading and insulting and just another way that replicates colonial practices. Kia ora.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for your submission this afternoon. That's probably close to the 5 minutes that we have with you. So just on behalf of the committee, I want to acknowledge you for being here and for providing your presentation.
Cool, thank you.
Next submission is from Ceasefire Now, Hawke's Bay. Joining us online is Nick Ratcliffe and Tāwhana Chadwick. Kia ora kouroua, thank you both for being with us. We've got you for a 5-minute submission this afternoon, so I'll hand straight over to you to start your presentation.
Tēnā koe. Toi tū te whenua, toi tū te whakaputanga, toi tū te tiriti, ti hei mauri ora. Tangata whenua mai, tangata tiriti mai, tēnā tātou katoa. Ceasefire Now Hawke's Bay is a community group of around 50 core members and over 500 associated members of all ages and backgrounds. We have held a public rally for peace and justice in Heretaunga weekly since October 2023 to call for an end to Israel's genocide and illegal occupation of Palestine. Although this kaupapa was what initially brought us together, our call has naturally expanded to include justice and liberation for all occupied lands and all oppressed peoples everywhere. Ceasefire Now Hawke's Bay completely rejects this bill and the colonial logic upon which it is based. It is in self-reflection of our expanded call that we speak to you today. The acknowledgement that as the lands and indigenous peoples of Palestine struggle under Israeli occupation, so too does the whenua and tangata whenua of Aotearoa struggle under occupation here. Occupation in our context is the Crown's broken promise to protect tino rangatiratanga, the complete political authority of hapu over themselves, their whenua, kāinga and all taonga. It is the attack on the political authority of hapu and the occupation of said whenua, kāinga and all taonga by colonial structures. This is our settler colonial experience. Settler colonialism is built from the logic of the doctrine of discovery, from the logic of domination, of white supremacy, of justified dispossession. This logic is rejected by a majority of New Zealanders when we talk of Palestine. However, New Zealand exceptionalism continues to cloud our judgments when we cast our gaze locally. Despite this clouded judgment, it remains as a pervasive logic and political driver for present-day breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, including this bill. As it was in the past, it remains to this day a continued deep injustice, a continued display of colonial violence.
Aye. Now is not the time to be redefining our founding documents. Now is the time to be holding them up to the light and examining our shared history. Now is the time for reconciliation so we can move forward together as equal treaty partners and not as another crown colonized commonwealth. We have a wero, a challenge for this government. Uplift Matike Mai, uplift He Puapua, rather than just dismissing it as some woke idealism. Produce your own report. Show us your own vision for a treaty-based future. We know that you're threatened by the sanctity and mana of the treaty because you're attempting to rewrite it. If you really believed that it was just a rat-nibbled nullity, you'd have ripped it up and thrown it out by now, but you haven't. You've chosen to engage with it, in a way. So here it is. We need a written constitution for these lands. It needs to be based on Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It needs to be compatible with He Whakaputanga or Te Rangatiratanga. And it needs to be fit for 1,000 years because the crown will not be around forever. The proposed principles are not based on Te Tiriti. They reflect neither the words nor the spirit of Te Tiriti. And they are incompatible with the independence of Hapu nations as described in He Whakaputanga. We have an opportunity here as a nation to reimagine honourable kawanatanga government and centre non-Pākehā voices. Māori never ceded sovereignty. Te Tiriti and He Whakaputanga are written proof of that. Palestinians never ceded sovereignty. No Indigenous people have ever voluntarily ceded sovereignty. Colonial rule is illegitimate and none of us are free until we are all free. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa.
Well, kia ora. Thank you, Tāwhana and Nick. Thank you for your presentation on behalf of Ceasefire Now, Hawke's Bay. We appreciate you being with us this afternoon and for your time.
Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora.
Folks, we have now a submission from Lily Hall-Butcher. So Lily is in the room with us. Thank you, Lily, for joining us. Give you some time to get settled in at the desk there. Kia ora, Lily. Thank you for being with us. We have you for 5 minutes this afternoon, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko nai te rangi tōku iwi, ko nai tūkai rangi tōku hapu. My name is Lily Pareo Hall-Butcher and I strongly oppose this bill. I oppose this bill because my whānau and tauranga have witnessed the negative consequences for the whole community of disregarding the rights Māori hold under Te Tiriti o Waitangi. As I explained in my written submission, the Tauranga suburb of Mount Maunganui suffers from severe air pollution as a result of heavy industry in the area. The 2023 report by the Institute of Environmental Science and Research shows that 13 people each year from Mount Maunganui are killed as a result of the air pollution, which makes up almost 10% of the total deaths in the area. District Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Jim Miller, has condemned the impact of the air pollution on human health, describing it as some of the worst air pollution in the country. 90% of the area, which now makes up the Mount Maunganui polluted airshed, sits within the original Whareroa block around our marae. Over decades, our tūranga waiwai was targeted for development by heavy industry because Te Tiriti o Waitangi had no status at the time, which meant developers could act with impunity on Māori land in a way that they never would have been able to on land owned by non-Māori. 8 schools and preschools are located within the Mount Maunganui polluted airshed. Children are therefore being exposed to high levels of contamination from the toxic fumes of heavy industry. This is the result of the lack of a buffer zone between industrial and residential areas, which happened because our ancestors' village was ignored when the area was first marked for development by noxious industries in the 1940s. Because the rights of our tipuna were ignored when heavy industry first came to Tauranga, children are being poisoned today. The rights Māori hold under Te Tiriti o Waitangi are sometimes spoken of as abstract things, and there is sometimes the assumption that they are unrelated to the rights of other New Zealanders. Yet the air pollution in Mount Maunganui provides an example of how failing to uphold Māori rights under Te Tiriti harms everyone in the long term. Because our hapu's right to tino rangatiratanga over our land was not upheld, everyone who lives in Mount Maunganui is now being denied the right to breathe clean air. This has had deadly consequences for the whole community, with the air pollution killing approximately 130 people in the past 10 years alone. Undermining the recognition and exercise of Māori rights under Te Tiriti is harmful to the rights of all New Zealanders. The current treaty principles that this bill seeks to replace, particularly the principle of protection, were put in place to prevent unjust situations like what has happened in Mount Maunganui from occurring. They were developed in response to many similar situations affecting Māori communities across the country and out of recognition of the fact that they all stem from breaches of Te Tiriti. Besides loss of life, there have been other negative impacts on the members of our whānau who live at the marae. The air pollution is often so bad that our kaumātua have to stay inside with their windows shut, sometimes for days on end, virtually trapping them in their homes. Black, greasy dust caused by the pollution covers everything and is difficult to remove. The air pollution has also impacted on our hapu's cultural practices. Speakers on the Pai at the Marae Aotea have been prevented from speaking due to the air pollution, while our hapu can no longer cook hangi using the traditional earth oven because of the presence of heavy metals in the soil. The air pollution is also having other consequences for the whole city. Tauranga is the fastest growing city in New Zealand, yet responding to this growth has been complicated by the air pollution. Housing intensification is needed to reduce homelessness, but doing so in Mount Maunganui is dangerous because it would involve more people living where they would be poisoned. Thus, ignoring our hapu's right to tino rangatiratanga is having negative consequences for all who live in the city. Additionally, it is costing the Bay of Plenty Regional Council $500,000 each year to monitor the pollution in the Mount Maunganui polluted airshed, money that would be better spent elsewhere if the pollution hadn't occurred in the first place. Because of our hapu's right to tino rangatiratanga over our land was ignored, great harm has been caused to the whole community in terms of loss of life, loss of opportunities and loss of enjoyment of living in the area. Undermining the exercise of Māori rights under Te Tiriti by changing the meaning of the treaty principles will have devastating consequences for us all. The committee must recommend that this bill be rejected in its entirety. Thank you.
Sure, Lily. Thank you for your submission. I know 5 minutes isn't a long time, but you got through quite a bit of content in that time. I'll open up for if there's any one question from anyone on the committee. Otherwise, it doesn't appear to be any. Look, just on behalf of the committee, Lily, thank you for being with us today, for providing your submissions. It's provided a new view and a new context, and it's quite helpful for the committee, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we are now coming to, I think, our final submission of the day. Right, so if Tim Wikirifi is online and you are the admin profile, if you can indicate and message the team, and we can let you in. Otherwise we don't have our final submitter. So if we don't have Tim, and if Tim wants to get in touch, there is another subcommittee tomorrow who might be able to squeeze him in if there's been some sort of technical difficulty. He's put up his hand. Well, let's throw caution to the wind and let in admin, and we'll assume it's Tim. And if it's not Tim, then we can move on. So hopefully we're pleasantly surprised by admin coming in.
Hello?
All right, kia ora, is that Tim?
Yes, it is.
Tim.
Had a few Zoom issues.
No, that's right, Tim. If you're able to turn your camera on.
My camera is on. I'm not sure. Hang on. Oh, here we go. No, sorry. What's happening here? Hang on. Video settings. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not able. The video signal is coming up as closed for some reason.
Well, given that it's the end of the day and we probably don't have a lot of time to troubleshoot, what we'll do with the indulgence of the committee is that we can hear you loud and clear, Tim. We've got your name here as well. So we will assume you are who you are and you've put your hand up. So we'll proceed with the submission. We've got you for 5 minutes this afternoon. So I'll hand it over to you to begin your presentation. And as long as you can see the screen, you can see the timer going, then that'll be fine.
That'll be fine. Thank you very much. I am Tim Wikirifi, and I am of the Arawa Waka I emphatically support the Treaty Principles Bill and look forward to a future day when the false doctrines of treaty separatism, treaty partnership, etc., have all been tossed into the wastebasket of history. These evils have all been founded upon a falsification of history. I contend the essential point of the Treaty Principles Bill is to dig down through nearly 200 years of confusion to see the truth, so that we can present to the people of New Zealand concisely what the historically objective meaning of the Treaty of Waitangi really is, according to those who penned the document, then explained its meaning to the Maori chiefs, who then debated whether or not they should sign it, and sign it they did. That is all that matters, that we get to the historical truth. It matters not whether we approve or disapprove of the historical truth about the treaty. Our feelings must be kept separate from this investigation so that the objective truth may be understood and upheld, regardless of whether the truth is convenient or politically correct or nice or nasty. Too many people involved in this bill seek to reinterpret the treaty in ways that serve their own interests and bias. If we want to understand Te Treaty o Waitangi, all we need to do is go and read the Littlewood draft. Yes, we have the original English draft of the treaty in the hand of James Busby. And when you compare Te Treaty o Waitangi to the Littlewood draft, I have been assured by experts they are a perfect match. So I call the committee to enter the Littlewood Treaty as evidence to the true meaning of Te Treaty o Waitangi. It was from the Littlewood document that Henry Williams translated Te Treaty o Waitangi, so it is fundamental. The Littlewood Treaty clearly states, Article 1, the chiefs of the Confederation of the United Tribes and other chiefs who have not joined the Confederation cede to the Queen of England forever the entire sovereignty of their country. Secondly, we have the recorded history of Governor Hobson clearly stating, when shaking the hands of every chief after they had signed the treaty, He iwi tahi tātou, we are now one people. That clearly embodies the spirit of the treaty, the very day it was signed. This has become known in recent times as Hobson's Pledge. Now, I was going to hold up a $50 note because that has a picture of one of the truly great statesmen, Sir Aparana Ngata. In his speech at the centennial celebrations of the Treaty of Waitangi on February 6, 1940, Aparana Ngata said, "Let me say one thing. Clause 1 of the treaty handed over the mana and the sovereignty of New Zealand to Queen Victoria and her descendants forever. That is the outstanding fact today, that but for the shield of the sovereignty handed over to Her Majesty and her descendants, I doubt that there would be a free Maori race in New Zealand today." This quote reflects Ngata's perspective that Maori chiefs, by signing the treaty, transferred sovereignty to the British Crown, a view he also expressed in other writings, such as his 1922 booklet, The Treaty of Waitangi, An Explanation, There he elaborated on the first article of the treaty, stating that the chiefs ceded the government of all their lands to the Queen, interpreting this as a complete transfer of authority or sovereignty. We would do well to consider his voice as authoritative on these matters. Finally, I would draw your attention to the Kohimarima Conference, a major gathering of chiefs, and they made a resolution that the several chiefs, members thereof, are pledged to each other to do nothing inconsistent with their declared recognition of the Queen's sovereignty and the union between the two races. I realise I've gone over time, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Look, we appreciate you battling through the technical difficulties and providing us with your submission today. So just on behalf of the committee, thank you for joining us, for providing us submission and for rounding off the submissions today. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, that does draw our submissions today to a conclusion. I just want to make a couple of acknowledgements. It's the last submission for subcommittee A, and so I just want to quickly acknowledge the work of the committee staff and the clerks, in particular Liam, Garble and Ed, who have helped the team through the submission for the past week. And also just want to acknowledge Kylie McConnell from Whakaata Māori and Lyric Wairudi Smith, who have been here reporting all of our submissions and listening to all the submissions so that they can summarise them and publicise them out there so that a lot of people who haven't had the opportunity to watch the submissions can read the summaries. So just want to acknowledge the work from those two in the room, and for all of those who've joined us in the gallery today. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your patience as we iron out some technical difficulties. Thank you to the team from the committee, MPs, members for joining us as well. And if you haven't had enough of us, you can always join Subcommittee B tomorrow as they finish off their submissions too. But with that, just thank you everyone who's participated, and we look forward to considering the bill further in full committee. So thanks, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.